I've never been one for sharing creepy stories or personal details of one's life online. I've always thought that kind of stuff was just overactive imaginations or people looking for attention or something. But after what happened last month to me, I'm questioning everything that I thought that I knew. I need to get this out to see if anyone else has dealt with anything like this. I'll be keeping some details about where I live pretty vague on purpose because I don't want anyone coming around or anything. So, let's just say that it's a small town, the kind where folks mind their own business for the most part, and my house sits on a quiet lot with a rickety wooden fence that backs right up to a massive stretch of woods, miles of dense pines and rocky hills, creeks that wind through like veins, you name it. Like I said though, I don't want anyone tracking me down or poking around, so that's all I'm going to say about the place. Now, I've always loved hiking. It's my escape from my desk job, a way to unplug and feel like myself again. I'm not some sort of hardcore survivalist or anything, just a guy who likes a few days in the wild with a tent and a backpack sometimes. Last month too, I planned a 5-day solo hike right through those woods behind my place, a loop that I'd done a couple of times before. It's a bit of a rough trail, about 40 miles total I would say, not well traveled because it's steep and unmarked in spots, but I know it well enough to navigate with a map and a compass. So I packed light, a tent, sleeping bag, dehydrated food, a water filter and my old hunting knife just in case. And my dog, Rusty, a bit of a scrappy mutt, who usually comes with me, he had to stay home this time. He had done something to his leg chasing a squirrel at some point, so I left him with a neighbor. And so, day one was pretty normal. I started at dawn, the air crisp, birds calling, my boots crunching on pine needles, and I made some pretty good time, covering about 10 miles before setting up camp near a shallow stream. I cooked some instant rice, listened to the frogs, and I slept fine that night, the woods alive with their usual nighttime hum. Day 2, though, is when things started to feel a little bit strange, I would say. I was maybe 15 miles in, following a faint path marked by stacked rocks, when the forest just suddenly went quiet. Not gradually, but all at once. No birds, no insects, no wind rustling the branches or anything. It was honestly like someone had just flipped a switch, and the silence was so thick that it made my ears ring a bit. I stopped, checked my surroundings, but nothing looked out of place, just trees and underbrush stretching out forever. I told myself that it was just a weird moment, maybe animals sensing a predator nearby or something, but I don't know. I kept glancing over my shoulder because I felt it too. A few hours later, I stumbled across something that didn't belong though. A small pile of feathers, maybe from a crow or a hawk or something, but they were arranged in a tight circle on a flat boulder. They weren't scattered like a natural kill is what I'm getting at. They were placed, deliberate, the quills pointing inward like a pinwheel. I even took a picture, thinking that it was some hiker's quirky trail marker, but it definitely gave me a bit of a bad vibe. I moved on, setting up camp that night on a high outcrop with a clear view of the valley below. But as I ate my dinner that night, I kept hearing faint snaps in the distance, like twigs breaking. Not in a pattern like deer or bear, too. It was too measured, like someone pausing and stepping and pausing again. I swept my flashlight across the trees, but the beam caught nothing but branches. Sleep, it didn't come easy that night. I kept waking, feeling like something was just outside of the tent, though I never actually did hear anything. By day 3, the unease was now constant though, like a weight on my chest. I found another oddity too around noon, a single footprint in the mud near a creek. But what was really weird was that they were about my size and I could have sworn that they were my treads from my boots. But I hadn't crossed that stream yet, and it was fresh, the edges sharp, no other prints leading to or even from it. I checked my map, wondering if I'd somehow circled back here or something, or maybe another hiker was nearby, but the trail, as far as I could tell, was deserted. I hadn't seen a soul in days, and I'm pretty sure I hadn't circled back. The print was too perfect too, like it had almost been stamped there just for me to find it. Well, later that afternoon, a smell hit me, sharp, like spoiled meat left in the sun for too long, but it came and went in patches, no source that I could track down. I thought maybe an animal had died nearby, but I couldn't find any flies and I couldn't find a carcass anywhere, just that stench sort of lingering in certain spots. That night I camped in a small hollow, and around 3 a.m. I swear that I heard a sound, a low 3-note whistle, clear and human-like but way too precise, almost like someone was practicing a tune. It came from the trees, maybe 50 yards off, and stopped as soon as I sat up. I gripped my knife, heart racing, telling myself that it was a bird or maybe a coyote, but honestly, it didn't sound like either one of them. That night, I stayed awake until dawn, the silence heavier than ever. Day 4, though, was worse. The trail suddenly felt wrong, like it had changed right under my feet. Familiar landmarks, a forked pine, a moss-covered rock, looked slightly off almost like they had been moved. My compass was now useless, the needle twitching lazily no matter how I held it, so I relied on my map, but even that seemed to betray me at points. Distances just didn't add up, and I kept looping back to spots that I swore that I'd passed hours earlier. The air felt thick still, like breathing through a cloth, and that rotting smell was now back, stronger than ever. Around mid-afternoon, I found another sign too, a small bundle of sticks tied with a strip of red cloth hanging from a branch like a crude ornament. It wasn't weathered too, like it had been placed recently, but I hadn't seen anyone who could have left it. I didn't touch it, just snapped a picture again, and I just kept moving, my pace quicker now, wanting to get out of here. That night I barely slept. I heard that whistle again, closer this time. It almost seemed like it was circling my camp, in fact. I didn't dare shine my light, and I just laid there clutching my knife, waiting for morning. And on the 5th day, I was done with this. I broke camp at first light, moving fast, desperate to get back to my car. The woods suddenly felt alive as well in a way that I couldn't explain, like every tree was leaning in and watching. I reached the trailhead by noon, my legs absolutely burning, and I drove home, the relief of seeing my street almost overwhelming. My house is a small one, a bit of a fixer-upper with a sagging back porch and a fence that's half-rotted, but it's always felt safe to me. The woods are close, though, and just beyond the fence. The tree line looms, dark and endless, but I got Rusty back from my neighbor, showered, fed him, and I just tried to put the whole hike thing behind me. I figured that the weirdness was probably just exhaustion, dehydration, or maybe just my mind playing tricks on me in the solitude. But then, about a week later, whatever this was, it seemed to follow me home. You see, it was a Wednesday night around 10:30 p.m. and I was in my living room sipping a beer, scrolling through emails on my laptop like I always did. Rusty was sprawled out on his bed by the couch, snoring softly. The house was quiet, just the hum of the fridge and the faint patter of rain from a passing shower. But then came a knock. 4 slow, heavy thumps on the front door. I froze, beer halfway to my mouth. I mean, I don't really get visitors out here, especially not at night, and my closest neighbor's a pretty good walk away. So I set my beer down, thinking that maybe it was a delivery guy lost or maybe a kid pulling a prank. But it came again. 4 knocks. Louder this time. Like someone was testing the door's strength almost. But then, I swear to you that I heard my own voice, clear as day, but almost as if it was recorded. "Hey, it's me, let me in," is what the voice said. Same pitch, same light rasp from years of smoking, but it was the same way that I clip my words too when I'm tired. Rusty instantly snapped awake, ears up, staring at the door with a low growl that turned into a bit of a whimper. But I didn't move. The voice came again, softer but more insistent. "Come on, I'm out here. Open the door." It was me, down to the way that I stressed certain syllables, but I was obviously here sitting on my couch. Rusty suddenly backed away, tail tucked, his eyes never leaving the door. I grabbed my phone to call someone, my brother, a friend, anyone, but the screen showed no signal, even though I always get service at home. The knocking stopped, but the silence was almost worse, heavy and wrong, like the air was holding its breath. I crept to the window by the door, keeping low, and peered through the crack in the blinds. The porch was empty, the single bulb above it casting a weak glow over the steps. Beyond the street was dark, and the woods loomed at the edge of my yard as always, their shadows blending into the night. Although I could have swore that I saw movement, a shape, tall, slipping between the trees, but it was gone before I could be sure, so I don't know about that one. Either way, I stayed up all night, lights on, Rusty pressed against me on the couch, and it must have been around 4 a.m. when I heard it again, that same 3-note whistle from the woods, faint but unmistakable, now coming seemingly from my backyard, right where the fence meets the tree line it seemed. I didn't look though. I kept every door locked, in fact, every window shut, and I just waited for daylight with Rusty. When morning came, I checked the porch, half expecting nothing, but it was like a scuff mark of mud by the steps. I don't know, it looked fresh and deep, like someone had been stood there for a bit, but it was hard to make out. Mind you, I hadn't been outside since the day before, and the rain had stopped hours earlier, so I'm pretty sure that it wasn't mine. I did my best to sort of dismiss it, and checked the backyard, but nothing was disturbed. No broken fence slats, no trampled grass, but still though, I was nervous, and I don't know if that's the reason why the air felt heavy, but it was like it had been on the trail again. I've been digging into local stories since then, trying to make sense of this. The town's got its share of old tales, like hunters hearing voices that sound like family, loggers seeing shapes that mimic people that they know. Some call it a skinwalker, others call it something in the woods. I did find a local blog post about a guy who heard his own voice calling from the forest at one point, but he didn't mention anything physical, like no footprints or signs or anything. The feathers, the lone print, the tied sticks, the whistle, it's all too tangible to write off as just my imagination. And so I've stopped hiking, at least for now. And honestly, I'm also thinking about moving now, somewhere far away from whatever this is. I've started leaving the porch light on too, checking the locks twice every night. But every night, I listen for that knock now, terrified that I'm going to hear my own voice again, begging to be let inside. I don't know what it was, but I'm almost certain that whatever it is, it followed me off of that trail after my hike those 5 days, and I really hope that it doesn't come back before I get the chance to move. I've always had a bit of a weird intuition about people. Growing up, I was surrounded by family members whose lives were full of danger, deception, and secrets. I learned early on how to recognize the subtle signals of someone predatory, the almost imperceptible way that they test your boundaries, the way that they smile a little too perfectly, the way that they seem charming on the surface but make your gut scream otherwise. So when my daughter was invited to playdates with the child of a parent that I barely knew, alarm bells immediately went off. You see, my mum had a friend named Gregory, a long-haul trucker who she said had been great with kids. The girls met through a local community organization, ostensibly a wholesome group for parents and children. But as I dug deeper, I realized the group's teachings were twisted, with extreme ideologies that made my skin crawl. I couldn't control my mum entirely, but I insisted that I accompany my daughter to these playdates and made it clear that Gregory was not allowed near her without me present. When I first met Gregory, he was disarmingly charming, almost painfully so in fact. He smiled constantly, his laughter a little too rehearsed, and his tone was soft, designed to lower your guard. He immediately began emphasizing how protective he was, not about his own child, but about me, as if I were fragile and needed his constant supervision. He mentioned odd rules about his own daughter, like she wasn't allowed to wear pants, only dresses, and that she must adhere to strict routines that seemed, well, oppressive. The first play date was at a local beach, too. Gregory insisted that I sit closer to him on a blanket that he had set up. "You can see the kids better from here," he said. I moved just to avoid awkward tension, but his gaze lingered far too long. He was silent for what felt like an eternity, almost studying me, and it left an unease in my stomach. I tried to focus on the kids, pretending that his presence wasn't disconcerting, but even then the hairs on my arms were standing up for sure. I could feel his attention like a physical weight pressing down on me. Well, over the next few weeks, the behavior escalated. During another play date at a children's art studio, he repeatedly offered me drinks, beer to be exact, while surrounded by children painting and laughing. At first, I just sort of laughed it off, but it became clear that he was testing boundaries, seeing how far that he could push without me objecting. When we moved to a trampoline park afterward, it became truly terrifying. He started physically interacting with me in ways that I repeatedly told him to stop. He lifted me and threw me into the foam ball pit despite my protests. He grabbed my wrist, already scraped from sliding on the trampoline, and pressed hard, watching me wince, almost gleefully. Every instinct in me screamed danger at this point. I couldn't sleep for days afterward too, my mind just racing. I reached out to my siblings, recounting the events, but even sharing it made me drink down my tears. My heart, it raced uncontrollably, and I felt trapped in a psychological fog almost. What scared me the most wasn't just his hands-on aggression, it was the combination of charm, manipulation, and unpredictability. His occupation as a trucker, too, meant that he was used to moving unseen and having control over situations. His behavior, it was deliberate. I could feel it. He was testing how far that he could push me, how much I would tolerate before reacting. After the second play date, that was when I cut all contact, forbade him from seeing my daughter, and implemented new safeguards. I rearranged my work schedule to always be present with my daughter, ensured all doors and gates at my home were secure, and monitored interaction with my mum closely. I never received cooperation from her regarding his address or his details, and I didn't pursue formal complaints. I simply wanted my daughter safe and my family shielded from this person. Even though it's been a year now, the memory still sits uncomfortably. I can still feel the weight of his gaze, the way that he positioned himself, the unsettling way that he smiled when boundaries were crossed. My instincts were screaming at me, and I know now that I would never ignore them again. Some people just carry danger in their presence, I guess, and it's not always visible at first glance. This man was one of them, manipulative, predatory, and completely unaware that I could see through his whole facade. The lesson, it's burned into me. Trust your gut and protect those who cannot protect themselves. Some people are not just socially awkward or misguided. They're dangerous, and their danger is hidden behind charm, politeness, and a perfectly rehearsed smile. This happened when I was about 18, back in the late 2000s. At the time, I had a weekend job at a small independent bookstore in my hometown. It wasn't a big chain, just one of those cozy places with crooked wooden shelves and the smell of old paper everywhere. My cousin also worked there part-time, and most of the regulars knew us by name, so the place always felt pretty safe. One afternoon, when the store was almost empty, a man in his late 20s or maybe early 30s wandered in. He didn't browse, didn't ask about books. Instead, he walked straight up to me at the counter, slid a folded piece of paper across the desk, and left without saying a word. Inside was a phone number and nothing else. I laughed it off at first. Strange, yes, but I'd had weirder interactions, I suppose. Anyway, a few days later, I was sweeping the sidewalk outside when an old green station wagon pulled up. Dangling from the rearview mirror was a small stuffed rabbit, dirtied and frayed. The driver leaned out, same man, and started asking me personal questions. I cut him off quickly, blurting out that I'm still in school and I'm not interested. Usually that worked, but this time it didn't. At night, near closing, one of my co-workers nudged me and whispered, "Hey, don't look now, but someone's been standing near the travel section for almost an hour now." And sure enough, when I glanced up, it was the same man, silent, staring, and pretending to flip through the books that he clearly wasn't reading. My manager, an older woman who took no nonsense, kept the office door open after that so that she could watch him. He eventually drifted outside, but sort of lingered across the street until long after dark. A couple of nights later, though, my aunt, who I hardly ever spoke to, sent me a strange email with the subject line, "Is this about you?" And attached was a screenshot from a local classified site. The post read, "Saw you shelving books at the shop downtown. You wore a plaid skirt, black boots, and a necklace with a red stone. You're beautiful. Would love to meet you. Signed a man in his 30s. The part that made my stomach drop, though, was the necklace detail. You see, I'd borrowed that necklace from my cousin only once, on the exact day that that man had been hanging around. I showed my manager, and she responded to the post herself. "Back off, this is a teenager you're talking about." But from then on, things only escalated. I'd see the green station wagon idling outside while I worked. Once I spotted it parked near my bus stop, but when I doubled back toward the store, the man was somehow already walking behind me on the sidewalk, too close and way too quickly. I panicked, ran inside, and he vanished before anyone else could see him. Eventually, the police got involved after I filed a report too. For about a week, an officer would swing by the store at closing to make sure that I wasn't being followed. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, the man just stopped showing up. The car disappeared. the postings vanished. I ended up transferring to another job the next year, but even now, whenever I see a green station wagon or an old stuffed rabbit, my stomach always knots up. I was 24 when this happened, and even now I feel a chill thinking about just how close I came to something far worse. So my roommate Kara was using a dating app and matched with a guy that she thought was perfect. He told her his best friend was also single, and before I knew it, she'd arranged a double hangout. I wasn't thrilled, but Kara begged me to come along with her. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Instead of grabbing coffee or going to a movie like normal people do, their idea of a first outing was to go hiking on a rugged trail just outside of the city. I thought that it was a really odd choice, but Kara seemed excited, so I kept my doubts to myself. They picked us up in an old SUV that rattled every time it hit a bump. Kara sat up front with her date, who was loud and animated, while I sat in the back with his friend, the guy that I was apparently paired with. He barely spoke the entire drive, just sort of sat there staring out of the window, his reflection flickering in the glass. When our eyes accidentally met in the rearview mirror, he didn't smile either. Well, the trail was steep and rocky, weaving up through dry hills, and from certain points you could see the neighborhoods far below, their lights flickering faintly against the darkening sky. The whole place felt strangely isolated, I guess, even though I knew the city wasn't that far away. But we started climbing, and before long, Kara and her date moved quickly ahead of us, laughing and sort of teasing each other. Within minutes, they rounded a bend and disappeared from view. That was when I felt his hand sort of clamp down on my shoulder. At first, I thought that maybe he'd tripped and grabbed me for balance, but then something cold and sharp pressed against the side of my cheek. Instantly, I knew what it was. It was a knife. My stomach dropped and I froze in place. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. I must have let out a nervous sound though, half sort of laugh and half gasp, because he leaned in close and whispered, almost like he was sharing a secret, "Most people panic. You didn't. That makes you interesting." Then, just like that, he snapped the blade shut, slipped it back into his pocket, and stepped away as if nothing had even happened. I walked faster, desperate to catch up to Kara, but he stayed close behind me the whole time. By the time that we reached them again, he had his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable, like nothing had happened at all. After the hike, they suggested that we stop by his friend's family house. I expected a modest place, but instead we pulled up to a gated property with manicured lawns in a house so massive that it felt surreal. Kara was dazzled, but I couldn't shake the sense that I was somewhere that I absolutely should not be. Inside, the guys offered us drinks. I declined, gripping my water bottle like it was a shield. I just wanted the night to end, and eventually Kara was ready to leave, and I practically sprinted to the car. It wasn't until later that I realized that I'd actually left my jacket behind, draped over one of their chairs. A few hours after we got home, Kara received a message from her date. It was a photo of my jacket, held by the man who had pulled the knife on me. The caption read, "She'll have to come back if she wants it." I didn't. I instantly blocked the number, deleted the app, and I never saw him again, thankfully. This happened when I was about 16, the summer before my last year of high school. My schedule was lighter toward the end of term, so most afternoons I'd get home before anyone else. Usually I loved having the house to myself too. It meant music cranked up, endless snacks, and gaming without interruptions. One Monday though, I came home to something strange. The small side gate that led into our backyard was standing wide open. And look, that might sound trivial to most people, but in our family, we were obsessive about locking things. My dad double-checked every latch every day, and my mum carried spare padlocks in her handbag just in case. I can assure you that that gate was never open. I brushed it off. I mean, maybe the wind caught it or something, and let myself inside. But as I pushed the front door, I then realized that the deadbolt wasn't set. The door was actually unlocked. At that, my chest tightened. I tried to convince myself that someone had just forgotten, but it definitely gnawed at me that it was unlocked in the first place. Inside, I noticed something else too. The spare set of house keys, which normally hung on a hook in the laundry, they had been moved to the counter near the sink. No one ever moved them, and that little detail put me on edge more than even the open gate did. I tried to distract myself, I guess, but the house just felt wrong. Like, I don't know, I was being monitored or something. The sound of the fridge humming seemed too loud, the creaks in the ceiling too deliberate. Every little noise made my skin prickle. The following day, I didn't go home at all, in fact, because my older sister had a minor medical procedure and we stayed overnight near the hospital that night. It was a relief to avoid the house, to be honest. And when I finally returned 2 evenings later, I was alone again. And the instant that I stepped onto that porch, dread just slammed straight into me. The porch light was now on, even though my mother always turned it off before leaving for work. The front door was locked this time, but the key turned too smoothly, almost as if it had only just been locked or something. Inside, the air felt heavy too, and I walked through each room trying to calm down, but it was when I got to the kitchen that I froze. The large butcher's knife that we usually kept in a wooden block on the counter was missing. I assumed that my mother had put it into the dishwasher, but when I asked her later, she swore that she hadn't touched it, and for days afterward, she couldn't find it anywhere either. That week, the tension got worse too. Every afternoon I came home before my parents, I'd grab the smallest paring knife and keep it nearby while I sat upstairs. I hated that I was doing it, but I just couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. And then there was the smell, a weird faint odor that would hit me as soon as I entered, like old leather mixed with something metallic. I couldn't trace where it was coming from, and it wasn't the garbage, it wasn't shoes, it wasn't the vents, it was sort of just, I don't know, in the air, I guess. The doors didn't help either, but my mother swore that she locked everything every morning, and yet almost every day I'd find either the back sliding door or the laundry door unlocked when I got home. Once, too, the laundry window was slid open just a few inches. She insisted that she hadn't touched it, but I don't know. When the holidays finally started, we went away for a week at the coast as well, and for the first time in probably months, I finally felt free of the anxiety. I slept soundly, swam in the ocean, and quite honestly, I forgot about the house entirely. But when we got back, reality hit again. Our neighbor walked over the second day that we were home, and they told my parents that they'd spotted a tall man wandering around our backyard during the evenings while we were gone. They assumed it was a relative checking the place, but of course it wasn't. That night, as my dad was locking up, he finally found our missing butcher's knife, and it was outside, lying on the wooden bench by the shed of all places. no one ever admitted to moving it, too. For weeks afterward, I heard footsteps crunching in the garden gravel at night. The smell of leather would waft through the downstairs hallway, and every single time that I came home alone, I felt that same sort of cold prickle of unease. And then, one day, almost suddenly I would say, it all just stopped. The footsteps, the smell, the unlocked doors, everything just sort of ended. I still don't know if it was some stranger squatting in our house, sneaking in when we were away, or if it was just some mind connecting dots that weren't really there, but whenever I walk past that shed, I always remember that knife, and I wonder just how close I came to meeting whoever left it there. Two summers ago, I was working at a local summer arts program teaching ceramics to teenagers. One of the other instructors, a man named Julian, struck up a casual friendship with me. He was older, maybe in his mid-30s, soft-spoken but intense, I would say, and always seemed to know a little bit too much about people. At first, I genuinely thought that he was just eccentric. One evening after a gallery visit, though, with a few co-workers, he invited me to visit a cabin that he had rented in the mountains. He said that it was a perfect spot to disconnect and be inspired by nature. Normally, I would have declined. I mean, I barely knew him. But something about the way that he framed it made me hesitate to say no. The drive was long, winding along foggy roads through dense woods. Almost immediately, too, I regretted doing this. He asked me odd questions the whole way there, like, have you ever truly been alone and afraid, or do you believe someone can watch you without being seen? I laughed nervously, trying to dismiss it as him being theatrical or something. Well, when we finally arrived at the cabin, it was darker than I expected. The porch light flickered weakly, and the structure looked like it hadn't been used in years. Peeling paint, broken shutters, overgrown vines crawling up the side. The door creaked as he opened it, revealing a living room cluttered with dusty furniture, stacks of old newspapers, and no signs of modern amenities like food or clean bedding anywhere. He led me to a bedroom and casually said that he was going to unpack, leaving the door ajar. I turned on the light and my stomach sank instantly. The bed had thick leather straps attached at the corners. There were also heavy chains coiled on a chair nearby. I backed out of the room slowly, heart hammering. I spent the night sitting in the corner, clutching a flashlight that I'd found in the kitchen. I told myself to stay calm, but every shadow on the wall seemed to stretch toward me. Every creak in the floorboards felt deliberate. I didn't sleep at all that night, listening to the wind whip through the broken shutters, imagining what he might do if I tried to leave. Well, the next morning he left to run some errands. That's what he told me anyway, saying that he'd be back by midday. So I cautiously explored the cabin in daylight, and it was worse than I expected. The refrigerator was completely empty. The stove was rusted shut, and the only running water was a slow trickle from a cracked pipe that I could find. On the porch, I noticed something even more unnerving too. Dozens of small, withered plants in pots, arranged in like a rough circle. All but one were brown and shriveled, but the center one, perfectly alive and seemingly well taken care of, seemed almost unnatural. Not in the paranormal sense, but like someone had been taking care of only that plant for some reason. Well, I gathered my belongings quietly and I left while he was gone. But as I was leaving, I noticed a set of muddy footprints leading from the cabin into the woods, and sort of circling back as though someone had been watching from the tree line. I was literally trembling the whole walk back to the main road. Later that evening, after I caught a lift, I sent him a message explaining that I couldn't continue visiting. He didn't respond, at least not directly. A single emoji appeared, a thumbs up. I felt the chill of his presence long after that message. And even now, months later, I cannot stop thinking about those straps, the chains, the single thriving plant in the dead circle, and the footprints that suggested that I wasn't truly alone in that cabin when I thought that I was. I don't know if I narrowly avoided a predator or if I just stumbled into someone's strange obsession or what. All I do know is that I will never be going back there, and will be avoiding this person from now on like the plague. When I was 14, I went to the community recreation center with my younger sisters for a swim one day. I'd always been a bit taller and broader than most of the girls my age, so people often assumed that I was a bit older, a fact that would soon become very unnerving. So after a couple of hours of splashing around in the pool, I started feeling a bit queasy. My younger sister noticed too and suggested that I take a break in the locker room. "You don't look so good," she said. "Maybe you should sit down for a bit." I nodded and walked to the changing area, relieved to have some peace finally. The locker room was empty, perfect for a moment to rest. So I sat on the bench, closed my eyes, and tried to relax. A few minutes later, though, I heard footsteps echo on the tile floor. A man had entered. He was tall, athletic, well-built, the kind of person that you notice instantly. I assumed that he was waiting for someone, maybe checking on a friend or a family member. But then he approached me, and to my horror, sat on the bench right beside me. His presence was overwhelming. Our thighs even brushed against each other. Instantly, I scooted away, giving him a look that clearly said, "What are you doing?" He sort of smiled, unnervingly calm, and said, "Don't worry, I won't hurt you," while casually resting his hand on my back. I froze, heart racing, unsure whether to run or what to do. I slowly stood up, backing away. Then he asked in a tone that made my stomach turn, "How old are you, kid?" 14, I said, my voice trembling. He shrugged, almost nonchalant. "Cool," he said. Then, as if trying to reassure himself, he told me that he was 23. I backed further toward the exit, my mind racing. The man began to stand, moving toward me with deliberate steps. That was when the panic truly set in. I tried to stay calm, looking for a way out. And at that exact moment, a bathroom stall door creaked open. A woman, probably in her mid-30s I would say, stepped out, and she noticed the situation instantly. I remember the relief flooding through me as she walked closer, maintaining a protective distance between me and the man. The stranger paused, his confident posture faltering as her presence became undeniable. He muttered something under his breath and then literally bolted toward the exit. The woman, whose name I later learned was Jessica, she stayed with me, checking if I was okay. She didn't rush me or speak harshly. She simply offered calm reassurance, really, sitting nearby until I felt steady again. She even waited with me while I changed out of my wet clothes, making sure that I was safe until my sisters finished and returned. Quite honestly, I don't know what would have happened if Jessica hadn't have been there. Her timely entrance and calm authority probably prevented a terrifying and truly terrible encounter from turning way worse. I've never forgotten her kindness. In fact, almost every time that I visit a public facility, I still think back on that day and I silently thank her for stepping in. Now, years later, I still remember that day vividly. What could have been a traumatic memory turned into a reminder of human vigilance and courage. A few years ago, my closest friend, Nina, had a small but growing presence online. She wasn't a full-time influencer yet by any means, but she had gotten enough free products and occasional perks to make it fun. One day, she got a direct message from a boutique hotel in a major tourist city on the East Coast too, offering an all-expenses-paid weekend stay in exchange for photos and a few social media posts. They said that she could bring a female friend along if she wanted to. Nina had never done anything like this before though, so she was a little bit hesitant at first. So she invited me, her longtime friend and confidant, to come along for support. Worst case scenario, she said, we just cover my ticket herself if the hotel refused. The email included a contract, which looked legitimate at first glance. It required us to pay for our flights up front and promised reimbursement upon arrival. We thought that it was probably just standard practice to avoid no-shows. Well, the trip began pretty normally, really. At the airport, a man held a small sign with Nina's name and the logo of the hotel account. He guided us to a black SUV waiting outside, and that is when things started to go wrong. As we were about to get in, the driver, a tall man with dark sunglasses and a thick accent, started yelling at Nina. He insisted that she could only bring a different girl, not me. His voice was angry and insistent. We were completely stunned. Another man who had walked up from the terminal seemed frustrated too and started arguing with the driver in rapid, sort of foreign speech. They demanded to know where this other girl was. Nina tried to explain that I was just her friend, that we were both fully on the trip plan, and that there was no other girl. The driver ignored her, and the man in the passenger seat suddenly jumped out, threw our luggage onto the pavement, muttered something underneath his breath, and the SUV suddenly sped off. We were speechless and utterly frozen, hearts pounding because we had no idea what to do. Nina immediately emailed the PR contact listed in the messages, a Rebecca, explaining the situation, but she never got a reply. We decided to take a cab to the hotel ourselves in the end, and when we arrived, we noticed right away that something was definitely off. The building looked completely different than the photos. The name on the sign had changed and the staff didn't recognize our reservations at all. The Instagram account that we had been in contact with, well, it had belonged to the old hotel, completely rebranded now, with new owners and no staff connection. And it was then that we realized what had just almost happened. Whoever had contacted Nina through the old account was using it to lure someone into a situation that we didn't consent to. The posts were old, photos outdated, and the account had a respectable number of followers, which made the scam feel legitimate, I guess. We called the local authorities, spoke with a detective, and tried to trace who had access to the account. In the end, though, it was just a dead end. None of the former employees had any connection, and the person behind it remained completely unknown. Nina, she cried for hours after realizing just how close she had come to being taken, I guess. I can still remember the look of shock and relief on her face when we finally left that hotel as well. We never got a follow-up from anyone. The Instagram account was eventually deleted, and we never heard from the perpetrators ever again. The whole ordeal, though, left a mark on both of us for sure. It was a chilling reminder that even small social media perks can be exploited by people with sinister motives. We both vowed to verify every online offer after that, every direct message and every contact, before even considering a trip like that ever again. Now, whenever Nina gets a DM from a hotel or a brand, we always triple check everything. And we never underestimate just how quickly a seemingly innocent opportunity can turn into something truly frightening. A lesson learned, I guess. Always vet online offers, trust your instincts, and never go alone to a situation that feels off. This happened a few years back after a major national crisis, back when travel was tense and paranoia in small towns ran high. I was 25 at the time, driving alone across the southwest to get back to my child, who was staying with their other parent. I had been out of state caring for a sick relative and was exhausted from the long trip. It was past midnight in Arizona, and the highway was almost completely empty, a long stretch of desert road with only a few dimly lit rest areas. I was approaching an exit for a small motel that I had planned to stop at for the night when flashing lights appeared in my rearview mirror. I slowed and pulled over, annoyed but compliant. I hadn't been speeding, and aside from the occasional tumbleweed rolling across the road, there wasn't a soul in sight. The officer, or what I assumed was an officer at first, walked up to my driver's side window, which already felt pretty odd. Usually highway patrols approach from the passenger side for safety. Well, he stared at me silently for a long moment, then abruptly walked back to his vehicle, only to return almost immediately. "Step out of the car," he said. Alarm bells rang immediately in my head. I had been pulled over plenty of times for speeding tickets in the past, but this felt different. Hesitant but careful, I stepped onto the asphalt. The desert wind was sharp and the silence heavy. "Have you been drinking?" he asked, his voice tense. "No," I replied. "Why did you pull me over?" "You've been driving strangely," he said, waving vaguely at the road behind me. It was absurd. I had been driving perfectly straight the entire time. Then he leaned closer and asked in a chillingly serious tone, "Are you dangerous? Are you carrying anything that you shouldn't?" I was stunned. I was a young woman, unarmed and miles from any other vehicle. I had identification and a background that clearly suggested that I wasn't a threat, but still, my pulse raced. He then demanded that I perform a field sobriety test. I followed the instructions as best as I could, walking a straight line across the cracked asphalt, arms outstretched, heels to toes. I passed, but the relief was short-lived. "Time to check the car," he said, pointing toward the vehicle. My stomach sank. Again, I was alone in the middle of the desert with someone who had a firearm and was acting unpredictable. I weighed my options. I could assert my rights, but I was exhausted and the thought of confrontation honestly scared me. I told him that it was fine, letting him search the car, hoping that compliance would keep me safe. He opened a small, nondescript suitcase that I had packed for work. It contained costume pieces for performances that I did on the side. "What's all this?" he barked. It's for my performances," I said quietly. "I'm an entertainer." His demeanor shifted instantly. He began yelling at me, calling me degrading names, mocking my lifestyle. I froze, realizing just how alone I actually was. Occasionally a car passed by on the highway, but most of the time it was just me and him in the desert, with only the wind and the hum of distant highway lights. Then he stepped back and gestured toward the tree line on the side of the road. "Walk over there," he commanded. I stopped cold. "No, I want backup. I want another officer here, and a female one," I said firmly. He blinked, clearly caught off guard by my insistence. I frantically waved at the next car that passed, signaling for help, heart hammering in my chest. After what felt like an eternity, he muttered something, scribbled a piece of paper, apparently a ticket, and motioned for me to get back into my car. He left without any further confrontation. I never did pay that ticket, and to this day I have never heard anything else from it. Looking back, even decades later, I now understand what this was. Something about the way that he moved, the insistence, and the lack of standard procedure made me wonder at first if he was truly a legitimate officer. The memory of standing alone on that desert highway, the cold Arizona wind cutting through my jacket, and the feeling of being completely powerless is something that I will never forget. But what truly solidified it for me, that this wasn't actually a police officer, is the fact that nothing ever came from that ticket. I know for a fact that if it was legitimate, that if I didn't pay it, that there would be far more trouble. But like I said, nothing ever came from it, and so all I can conclude is that whoever that was, they were not a legitimate police officer. And so, even now when I drive late at night through remote areas, my pulse always quickens at any flashing lights behind me. And I remember just how thin the line between routine traffic stop and real danger can feel. After a breakup, I thought casual dating would be some harmless fun. I joined a dating app, clearly stating that I wasn't looking for anything serious. My goal was simple: meet someone, have a drink, maybe a dinner, and keep my life normal. I matched with Evan, a man new to the city, who seemed charming at first. He said that he wanted to explore and meet people, nothing permanent. Our first meeting was at a quiet, familiar cafe where I knew the staff and felt safe. Evan arrived early, polite and well-dressed. We talked about work. He was a freelancing graphic designer trying to make a name for himself, and our living situations too. I explained that I had a modest apartment that I could afford thanks to careful savings. At the end of the night, he insisted on walking me home. I said no though, preferring an Uber. He teased me a bit, suggesting that I might have plans with somebody else, and I laughed it off, but that little joke, it gnawed at me a bit. 3 days later though, he insisted on seeing me again. This time, I chose a bistro owned by friends. From the moment that we sat down, too, Evan's tone had shifted. He criticized the food that I had ordered, even though I was paying for myself. Then he asked again if he could walk me home. While we argued, his phone rang, and I overheard, "Yeah, I'm with her. I'll stay tonight." I assumed that he was talking to a roommate, but the odd way that he said it just didn't feel right. The next morning, he appeared outside of my building, waiting to take me to a park for a picnic. His breath smelled strongly of smoke, and there was a sort of metal scent that I couldn't place. During the picnic, he tried to kiss me repeatedly. Each time I dodged, but by late afternoon I wanted to go home. Ubering back was expensive, so I reluctantly agreed to ride with him. On the drive, Evan's demeanor darkened. His voice dropped to a threatening whisper. "Why are you keeping me out of your apartment? What are you hiding?" I reminded him that I wasn't interested beyond casual outings. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly then that his knuckles whitened. He started mumbling about trust, control, and how women don't appreciate men like him. The tension in the car became suffocating. Every shadow outside seemed ominous, every passing car a potential witness to what may be about to go wrong. Thankfully, I made it home that day, but over the next few days, he escalated. He messaged constantly, claiming that he couldn't stop thinking about me and insisting on seeing me again. I finally agreed to a dinner with the strict rule that he would not pick me up this time, but he ignored it. When I came downstairs, he was waiting at my gate, uninvited. "Hey, show me which apartment's yours. I want to see where you live." My stomach instantly dropped. I insisted that we go to dinner first, but the unease in his eyes made me feel weird. At the restaurant, he received another call, and he whispered angrily and kept glancing at me. "Am I sleeping there tonight?" he asked. I said no, firmly. And he exploded into a tirade about how ungrateful and selfish I was, raising his voice in public even. Patrons turned to look, but nobody intervened. The aggression in his tone, though, sent chills down my spine. This wasn't about dating anymore. This was now about control. After dinner, he insisted on driving me back. I noticed a duffel bag in the back of his car filled with clothes and toiletries. My heart raced as I realized that he might be prepared to stay at my apartment, regardless of my consent now. During the ride, he continued berating me. "You think that I'm going to leave? You think that I'll just go?" His eyes darted toward the rearview mirror, as if testing my fear. I realized the bag in his car was a trap. He intended to move in if I let him in even once. As we pulled up to my building, I had a plan. I remembered a small cafe behind the building where I lived, leading to a secure back gate and stairwell, and I bolted the second the car slowed down, running through the cafe, ducking under the gate, and racing up to my apartment. My heart pounded so violently that I thought that it was about to burst, but I pounded on my neighbor's door, explaining everything, and they agreed to let me in and to stay alert. That night, my phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from Evan. He promised that he wasn't done, that he would find a way to see me again, and that this wasn't over. Sleep was impossible now. Every noise outside made me jump. Shadows of people walking past my window made me tense. Even when I tried to block it out, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching. For weeks, I stayed inside, blinds drawn, doors locked, double-checking every lock. Friends suggested that I call the police, but without direct threats, there wasn't much that they could really do. I changed routines, took alternate routes, and avoided places that I might run into him. My life shrank into a cage of fear, I guess. Finally, though, I blocked all contact, changed my routines, and slowly regained some sense of safety. But I would be lying if I didn't say that the memory lingers. The smell in the car, the duffel bag, his obsessive insistence, all of it still sits with me. Even now, I still check my logs twice, make sure the gate is secure, and never let anyone drive me home alone anymore. Evan's presence, though gone, has definitely left a mark that I cannot shake. So I was like 7 or 8 years old, and my mum had just tucked me into bed. I fell asleep like I always did, but then I woke up sometime later to my mum's voice saying, "Time for bed, want me to tuck you in?" I was confused by this, given that she'd already tucked me in. I don't think that I responded because I was sleepy, but then something slapped me across the face really hard. I woke up, looked around, but nothing was there. Weird. Obviously, that freaked me out, so I hid under the covers and tried to go back to sleep. I was shaking, and I had that feeling like somebody else was in the room with me, standing right behind me, even though I confirmed that nobody was there. After a minute, I got slapped again though, 2 or 3 more times. This was even more confusing given that I was under the blanket now, so what the heck could be slapping me? And why did it have my mum's voice? I was obviously very freaked out, as you can imagine. I laid there in fear for what felt like an hour, unable to sleep. Then, finally, I got the courage to get out of the bed and go to my mum's room to find out if the voice that I had heard was really hers. She was asleep, though, and when I woke her up and told her what had happened, she had no idea what I was talking about. In other words, it was not her who came into my room. She was asleep the whole time. I don't know if it was paranormal or not. Maybe it was sleep paralysis or something. I definitely experienced that as a kid, but I know that I felt pretty awake after being slapped in the face like that, so I'm really not sure. If it was just the one slap that startled me awake, I would say that it was probably just a dream. But the repeated slaps after I woke up, that makes me really doubt that. The memory of this event has always stuck with me quite vividly, and the details of the story have never changed. Personally, I don't think it was sleep paralysis though, because I know what that feels like, but I really just have no idea if it was paranormal or not. I've heard some similar stories, and people are very quick to attribute experiences like that to demons, but I don't believe in that kind of thing. I'm not sure if I even believe in ghosts, in fact. All I do know is that experience scared the heck out of me, and I just don't have a convincing explanation for it. There were a lot of other weird things that happened in that house, but that experience was by far the most extreme. So when I was in my teens, my mum and Nana told me that when I was 3 or 4, I used to hide behind the sofa to talk to my friend. They assumed that I had an imaginary friend, until one day my Nana asked who my friend was. I told her apparently that my friend was called Wee Stevie. He had blonde hair like me and he wanted his lemon bonbons. My mother had a younger sibling who died when he was 8, and my mum was about 16 at the time, and 4 years later at 20 she had me. Her brother was called Stephen, my Nana was Scottish, and we lived not far from the English and Scottish border on the English side. So apart from my Nana speaking Scottish and having an accent, my accent was very much English. So it was odd for me to use a Scottish term such as we, and I couldn't have known about Stephen really. And apparently one day before my 5th birthday, I told my Nana and Mum that Wee Stevie couldn't visit anymore. And that was that. He was gone and I never spoke to him again. I do have a vague memory of sitting behind the sofa talking, but I don't remember seeing him. Well, when I got into my teens, odd things began to happen in the house. Never directed at me though. Pictures would fall from walls, and over the space of 6 weeks, the living room door shook very gently until the day my Nana was hoovering in there, and the door shut on her and wouldn't open. I was actually there at the time that this happened. I was upstairs with my mum when we heard my Nana shout. We all lived together in the same house Stephen also lived in. I ran downstairs with my mum and we both witnessed the door shake, with my Nana shouting from the other side to stop it and to let her out. She thought that it was my mum, but I know that it wasn't. There was nobody around. During this time, whilst I never had anything happen directly to me, I started to feel like there was something bad in the house, and I also started having reoccurring nightmares about being in the house alone and trying to get out, but an invisible force would chase me, grab me by my feet, and drag me back into the living room. I'm 43 now, and occasionally I still have this nightmare. I just always felt like there was something negative attached to me while living there. As an adult, I've also experienced some strange occurrences over the years. Once when my son was a newborn, I'd put him in his cot to sleep at around 8 p.m, so it was pretty dark at this stage. I crept out the room and pulled the door to, leaving the landing light on. There was no light on in the room, but his baby monitor went on. I left the house to go to the car to get my bag at one stage, and when I looked up at the house, the bedroom light was now on. As I got closer to the house, I could hear him crying through the monitor. As I went into the room, he'd got tangled in the blanket, and it had covered his face and he was struggling to breathe. Well, fast forward a few years, and we'd moved house. Odd things used to happen, nothing really too weird, but just shadows which could be explained, or our dog staring at walls. It got more frequent if there had been an argument though in the house. And one morning my husband and I were having a disagreement about our business. We were sat at the kitchen table facing the living room with the door open. Our little dog was fast asleep on the sofa, when out of nowhere, a giant Yankee candle that had never been lit flew off the table and hit my husband's Xbox that was sat next to the cabinet that hard that the box ended up in the kitchen doorway. Our poor dog was terrified and ran into the kitchen to be with us. We then left this house and moved, and things seemed to escalate in our new home a lot. Our dog wouldn't let you leave him alone, which was very unlike him. As soon as you walked out of the door, he would howl and was really distressed. By this point, my son was 18, and we all felt a negative presence. You felt like you were being watched all the time, and even with the heating on and being really warm, the room would suddenly have freezing spots that you could feel with your hands. The Alexa would start playing music, although this probably does happen to other people's Alexas too, so it may not be paranormal. But one morning, my son asked me to stop coming into his room at night. I asked what he meant, and he said that he'd often wake up with his door opening, and he assumed I was standing there watching him. He'd ask what I was doing, and the door would just close slowly. It is true that a couple of times I did go into my son's room to see if he was home after he started driving, but this was only a couple of times, and my son never woke up or spoke to me, that's for sure. Then, on to my husband. So ever since we've been together, he has suffered from extreme para-insomnia. In his dreams, he constantly sees a 7-foot dark figure in the corner of the room, and this has been in every house that we've lived in. It taunts him, touches him, and watches him. He then acts out his dreams and will pull me out of the bed. He's picked our dog up and tried to escape the room. He's stood above me on the bed screaming, hit me, dragged me, and it's usually always because he's trying to either fight this thing or get me away from it. He's had para-insomnia since he was 13, but only started seeing this dark figure since he's been with me. And so, that's my story. Well, a short condensed version of it anyway. I have no idea if we're both just sensitive to this stuff or if we're both just going crazy. Our current house feels nice with a good energy. We do often feel something, but it's nice and warm, I guess. My husband still dreams about this thing too, but not as often, which we're thankful for. But the reason why I'm here is to get your thoughts. What do you guys think about all of this? This happened in 2018. My parents, my husband, and I, we were driving to Indianapolis to see some family. I'd found out about my husband's 4-month emotional affair with his unstable ex, and I was really struggling and I felt extremely alone. His ex had tried to break us up, and I was afraid that she would succeed because of how manipulative she really was. I lied and told my husband that I was having a cigarette while actually I went to the bar. I ordered 2 double vodkas with a splash of orange juice, and I was really connecting to the bartender when she said that they were closing, and so she gave me another bar that was close by. I was already feeling relaxed when I got to TGI Fridays. I ordered 2 more double vodkas, and I was pretty much wasted. So I went outside to have a cigarette and to sort of wake me up a bit. I was leaning against a light pole in the parking lot. Time passed, and I suddenly realized that I was being walked and pushed into a car. Suddenly I heard my mum yelling to stop, that I was her daughter, and this creepy man was challenging her on whether we were related. It was insane, and I don't really remember too much, but I do remember him trying to steal me, if that makes sense. This guy would not give up and was basically holding me hostage. That's when my mother said that she'd call the police, and he drove away so quickly that his passenger driver was still open. My mother and husband told me later that they tracked my phone and came to where it said that I was. I had my phone in my purse, so I don't know if the guy got rid of it or what, but Whatever the case, it was very scary. They found my phone discarded. Then my mum called 911 because I was extremely drunk and am not making any sense. I woke up in the hospital. I was tied down because apparently it was for my safety. And when I actually woke up, I had huge bruises on my arm from the guy trying to get me into his car, and also an incredibly huge bruise on my chest. I didn't know what happened at the time, but I felt very guilty and never really understood what actually happened. My husband and I eventually worked it out and we're good now, but I'm thankful that my mother and him were both there that night, because if they weren't, really, I don't want to think about that. This happened about 3 years ago when I was 15. At the time, I was making pocket money by mowing the lawn at my mum's condominium. The lawnmower was kept in a small storage building where only I and the landlord had keys to. Some backstory about the building. It didn't have any windows and only one door. It consisted of only one room where the lawnmower and other gardening stuff were kept. The building's inner and outer roof had a small space in between them too. I wouldn't call it an attic, but just a space really. The inside roof was made of only spare planks, which meant that you could see into the said space. Anyways, one Sunday I needed to mow the lawn, so I took the keys and headed to the storage. The door was locked as usual, so I opened it with the keys. I stepped into the storage and, with no particular reason, I looked up, and my heart suddenly dropped. Up there, on those rickety planks, there was a man just looking down at me. I looked up only for a second or two and he looked back at me. His clothes were dirty and face covered in scars. I didn't want him to do anything, so I just sort of pretended as if I didn't see him. I took the lawnmower, walked out the door and closed it behind me. I immediately ran out to our apartment and called the police, who arrived in about 5 minutes. The police, they went in and a couple of minutes later they brought out the man in handcuffs. The man had been trying to climb back into the roof while holding a pair of garden shears, and that was truly horrifying. Who knows what could have happened if I didn't look up while entering the storage. Me and my mum moved out sometime after this, but that is an event that I'm grateful that didn't turn into something worse. It was autumn in 2015. I was 23 years old, I'm now 31, and during that time I lived in Lancaster as I was studying at the university there. For those who are not familiar with the place, it's a small and rather quaint town in the northern part of England. As a student, you could either live at the university campus or in private accommodation in the town. I had decided to live in a newly built renovated apartment in a nice side of the town, and yes, it was very expensive. Now, I had already been studying for 2 years and had reached my 3rd year by this stage. At this time, I had grown accustomed to the layout of the town and I felt comfortable and safe living there, semi-independently at least, with 2 other friends who were also studying at the university. Since my 1st year, I had decided to improve my fitness by taking nightly runs around either the campus or the town. As we were living in the town centre by my 3rd year, I would run either with my housemate or sometimes alone. The important thing to note about this place though is that, and this will be important for later, it's quite a large residential area that is hilly and far removed from the bustling centre, which at that time was a hub for the students or the local northern folk, probably drinking in pubs or eating pies or something. Now, occasionally, like I mentioned, I would run with my housemate. However, I preferred to run alone and listen to some kind of heavy metal. I was a big fan of Deftones during that period. On this particular day, as I said, a chilly autumn evening, I had decided to run alone, and it was about 8 PM and I had my headphones in. I had started to run up to the more isolated district that led up to a very pretty residential area and a large green called Williamson Park. It actually had a butterfly museum at the top of the hill. And next to the park was a very large graveyard, the kind that is miles wide and had different areas, large yew trees, crumbling graves, a crypt in the center overrun with leaves and ivy. But what was especially creepy about this particular cemetery was that it had the ruin of an old mental asylum or hospital at the other side. You could actually sneak in if you walked across the width of the cemetery and crawled through a small hole in the fence that led to the asylum grounds. This was obviously not advised though, as guard dogs roamed the derelict building all the time. It was not a place that you wanted to be during the night either. So, I had made my way past Williamson Park and up to the entrance of the graveyard. Immediately, my eye was drawn to something small standing at the imposing gates of the graveyard. They were kind of tall, black iron gates that were at the bottom of a little winding path. I felt a little apprehensive, but it wasn't unusual to see people walking their dogs, etc., out of the graveyard, so I started to slow my pace to a walk in the direction of the shape. As I drew nearer, I realized that the shape was a child, maybe around 9 to 10 years old, and they were running towards me frantically. They looked panicked and scared. I think that they were crying. I vividly remember that the girl was not wearing a coat, only a thin dress that would not be suitable for the harsh autumn here. She asked me if I could help her though. She was desperate and seemed to be frightened of something. She kept looking back into the graveyard, which at this point was totally pitch black beyond the gates. I mean, there was absolutely no light beyond that path. As the graveyard was quite large, it was chilling to see the depth of the blackness and the vulnerable child standing at the mouth of the gate, helpless like this. I don't recall what the girl said exactly, but I then offered to call the local police. I dialed 999 into my phone and had it on loudspeaker, but the girl immediately changed. She was not happy about the fact that I was calling the police. That was clear. She stopped crying and seemed angry, almost demanding, and insisted that she did not need the police to help. I reassured her that it was best to inform the police, even offered to walk her to the station, which was about 20 minutes back down the hill. And this is where the story gets weird and a little bit terrifying too. You see, the girl turned and ran back into the graveyard. She ran directly through the gates and into the eerie blackness. She didn't turn back and just ran as quickly as possible until she had completely disappeared. And it was then totally silent. I was spooked beyond belief, now standing in the darkened street completely alone. I had so many questions, like who was that girl? Why was she alone like this, at this hour? Why was she scared of the police? Why wasn't she frightened of the dark? Who might she be running to, or maybe from? I turned and I ran all the way back down the hill, not stopping until I had reached a well-lit, built-up area. And safe to say, I didn't run on my own again at night after that. My post-secondary classes were always at night, and I usually got out at around 11:30 p.m. Home was 5 long Florida miles away, a drive that typically took around 25 minutes. At that time, my fiancé and I were living in a brand new apartment complex on the 4th floor. From day one though, strange things started happening. Our apartment had an unusual layout, I guess. Basically a big circle. The bathroom connected to both the living room and the kitchen, with doors on either side, and our closet was located within it. For whatever reason too, that closet door refused to stay shut. I tried countless experiments to figure out why, but every time without fail I'd come back half an hour later and it would always be open. Then there was our cat. He would sit in the bathtub staring at the bathroom door, letting out these low, drawn-out meows. It was unsettling, but we figured that it was just one of those weird pet things, especially because nothing else was happening at the time. Well, until it did. One night, my fiancée called in a panic. She said someone had tried to rattle the front door handle right off the door. I checked our front door camera, but there was no sign of anyone outside. While I was still on the live feed, trying to calm her down, it happened again though, a violent, almost desperate rattling, like a grown man trying to tear the door off its hinges. The door was the only point of egress or ingress in the apartment. I told her to grab the shotgun, sit in the corner, and that I was on my way. I left class instantly, hopped onto my motorcycle, and somehow made it home in 5.5 minutes, blowing through the red lights. When I parked and got into the elevator, I suddenly felt like I'd swallowed an apple whole and couldn't breathe. It was as if an invisible weight pressed down on my chest. Still though, I pushed forward, made it to the door, and signaled for her to put down the gun. I searched the entire apartment, but there was nothing. That night passed without further incident, but from that point on, everything escalated. The strange occurrences became routine. We have 2 dogs, one of which is small, older, and a white dog, and one day she was padding through the bathroom, heading toward my bedroom to crawl under the bed, her usual cozy spot. My fiancé followed her, only to find that the dog wasn't there. After a few moments of confusion, she walked back into the living room where the dog was lying on the couch, looking as relaxed as ever. Then there were the objects. We came home one day to find all of our plates. They had been moved into the silverware drawer. On another day, we found both our ottoman and chair had been rotated to face the fish tank, almost as if in a deliberate contemplation sort of way. We decided to leave them that way. The strange occurrences continued though. We'd be walking through the apartment and suddenly hit pockets of like the worst smells imaginable. And just as suddenly, the scent would vanish. We'd also hear footsteps circling around the kitchen island, even though we were alone. Things got so intense that we eventually moved our bedroom into the living room, turning the actual bedroom into my fiancé's workspace. The nightmares had become relentless, and we just felt safer being in an open space like this. All in all, it was a 0 out of 10 for us, and I would not recommend. Before this, I was a devout atheist, firmly grounded in the belief that science explained everything. But after this, now, I'm more open-minded for sure. I've come to believe that there's a lot that we don't understand about what really happens in this world, and perhaps we never will. This happened in 2018 in Germany. So I was walking my dogs on the usual route that I take pretty much every day. You basically walk out of the city on a road mostly used by farmers to get to their fields, and it was a windy but clear day. Now, the first thing that I'd noticed was that my 2 dogs, both labs, didn't want to go any further. This is highly unusual because they're always excited to go on a walk, and they've never done that before or ever since then. The second thing that I noticed was that there was this weird sort of, like a low frequency humming, which sounded like it came from the sky almost. It pretty much sounded like a really loud, low flying aeroplane, so I scanned the sky, but I didn't see anything. Yes, it was weird, especially in combination with the behavior of my dogs, but I didn't really give it too much thought, and I tried to get my dogs to just keep going, but they persisted and started whining even. Now I started to worry a bit, so I looked around the area to see what could have possibly frightened them so much. That's when I saw this strange object standing in a field about maybe 15 meters off the side of the road. This field usually has horses in them, so it's surrounded by an electric fence. However, on this day there were no horses there. And this strange feeling of dread or primal fear suddenly filled my body completely when I stared at this object, maybe because it didn't look like anything that I'd ever seen before. I felt like I was stuck on the road and I just couldn't move. I noticed now that this object, which I firstly believed to be some sort of a machine because of its silver or chrome color, had vague human-like features. It had 4 limbs, all ending in sharp edges. They had some sort of black material or liquid on them as if it had dipped them in oil. Its head also had clear edges and looked very unorganic, I guess, like it was constructed. It looked directly at me and I could see that it was sort of blinking permanently. Its nose and mouth looked more like openings in its head. The longer I looked at it, the more strange things I noticed and the stranger I felt myself, like I was looking at something so foreign to my understanding of the world and life that I was about to fall apart. On top of its head too, it had this sort of cone-like structure cut out of the very top where some sort of orb was. It looked like a perfect golden ball and it was reflecting the sunlight. I also began to notice maybe the weirdest feature of this thing was that it was extremely muscular. Still, it looked more like a shell in which muscles were carved than actually organic matter, I guess. I also saw what looked like cables on its upper body and arms, as well as stripes on its arms and legs. As embarrassing as it is, I honestly felt like I was about to wet myself, so I tried with every fiber of my being to turn around, and when after about 30 seconds I could move again, I ran away as fast as I could, with my dogs following quickly behind me. I did tell my parents and brothers, and together we checked the spot again, but when we got there, it was gone. To this day, I genuinely hate myself for leaving my phone at home because even though my parents say that they believe me, I get this weird feeling that they actually don't. I actually went to therapy about this encounter because I was really struggling with what I had seen. I've never had any other kind of hallucinations in my life. I've never taken any drugs and I don't have any mental illness, which could explain what I saw that day. I cannot rationalize it, and it made my already bad anxiety feel much worse. It felt like I saw something which I just wasn't meant to, something which my brain just couldn't process. Now, 6 years later, I'm better, but still think about what I saw basically every day. I still live here, and that spot is only a little ways away. Sometimes I go on walks there, but always with my brother, and every time I hear an aeroplane, I get really uncomfortable and make sure that it's actually a plane. I even downloaded the app Flight Radar to make sure that there was actually a plane in the area when I hear one. The reason that I'm sharing this now too is that I'm hoping to find out if anybody else has seen something like this. Maybe somebody has experienced something similar to me, and if so, then please do tell me because I would love to know that I'm not alone. I work at a retail grocery chain, and in the store there is a liquor department which is sectioned off from the rest of the grocery store. I was working in that department when a man came in. He purchased a few alcohol shots and made conversation with me. Everything was pretty normal until he pulled an axe out of his back pocket. I was completely shocked, to be honest. It seems really odd to say, but seeing this very strange man rambling about how nobody would dare mess with him because of his axe, well, it made me freeze in my spot. He held it out in the open and kept mentioning how sharp the blade was. He cut his receipt in half on the counter in front of me to demonstrate just how sharp the blade was. He was mentioning how it would cut through bone and flesh. I tried not to escalate the situation and didn't really react or say much about the axe. I'm ashamed to say that I was sort of frozen and didn't tell him to put it away or leave or anything. I wanted to keep everything calm and get him out as quickly as I could. I let my supervisor know immediately once he left. She pulled me aside and asked me to describe the man. A security officer was able to identify the man on camera. My store manager ended up contacting the police. I gave a police officer my recounting of the events, and he informed me that he spoke with the individual outside in the parking lot and that they would be trespassed from the store. It was incredibly unnerving though, being in that situation, in an isolated area with somebody who seemed to be mentally unstable, holding a huge, very sharp axe. So I'm 21, and I'm not sure if gender really matters to this story, but I'll say it anyway, I'm female. Now, this might sound maybe a tad bit overdramatic, since it's been years since this incident has happened that caused this fear, but I just wanted to get it off my chest as someone who doesn't really talk about it. I personally found this encounter super creepy, especially getting older and being able to look back on it all. I've learned a lot from it, so maybe sharing it here, what happened, could either guide others to stay alert that it could happen to them, or at least know the signs. So I live in rural Ohio, and there's not much that goes on here. We don't live in the best area either, with lots of druggies and pedos. Just if you have kids, you really shouldn't live around here basically. When I was younger, we didn't really worry much about anything happening to us or questionable things due to the fact that our family is known in this area. And my grandpa was a known cop for many years and was extremely respected, and people knew that he would fight over us. So, nobody really messed with us. We also lived around multiple other children our age. It also wasn't uncommon to let your kids run around by themselves before nighttime because our neighborhood essentially relied on each other and the other kids to keep each other safe, and it worked for the most part. We also knew what people to stay away from, and they knew to stay away from us as well. So, when I was in middle school, the bus ran at 7 a.m., and we would have to be at the end of our long driveway by that time to catch the bus on time. This happened during the winter, and our bus tended to be late sometimes and would reach us around maybe 7:05 to 7:15 at the latest. But we made sure to be out at 7 a.m. just in case they were on time. It was me and my two cousins. One was 4 years younger than me, and the other was a year older, but we were in the same grade. The road is straight where our driveway is, so cars come by multiple times, and you would be able to see if a car was slowing down and such, and they'd see us as well. We were always told to stand by the end of the driveway, and always keep a distance so if a drunk driver or whatever happened to be swerving, that we would be okay for the most part. We were at the age where me and my cousin, who was in the same grade as me, essentially babysat the younger cousin, and we didn't have any adults accompanying us at the end of the driveway anymore. Now, it was super cold that day and the sun was just coming up, and we were annoyed because the bus was late while waiting in the cold. I noticed a car was coming, and again, this happened all the time, so it wasn't like I was checking it out or anything. I just noticed it and went back to listening to music on my phone. I hear a loud brake sound though, so I look up and the car is in front of our driveway now, fully stopped. The man in the car was waving his hand toward us to signal us to come closer to him, and of course I refused and was frozen in my spot because this had never happened before. He could tell that we were obviously shaken back by this and said that he worked for a school but was lost and he just got hired. He named a school that was about an hour away as well. I want to remind you too that it's past 7 a.m. at this point, and I immediately knew that he was lying. It didn't make any sense to me why he would be lost at a job that he said that he'd already got. Plus, it being this late, I'd think that he would probably be at the school by now. What I'm trying to say is that there is no way that he would be lost to the point that he's an hour away from the district and signaling children to his car the way that he did if he was a teacher at all. It also made no sense to me logically how he would be lost from a job that he obviously had to go to in order to get hired for. This was before Zoom and all those things, I'm pretty sure. So I immediately said that I'm going to go and get an adult, and he clearly panicked at that and said that it wasn't necessary, that he just wanted us to get closer and show him where to go. I pointed straight. I truly don't know the direction to the district, but that was not my main focus, obviously. I told him to go straight and he ignored me. My little cousin was moving towards his car and I grabbed him by his hair and kept him by me. I refused to let go of his head as well. I'm shaking and I'm trying to not show that I'm scared because I don't know what's about to happen. The driveway is a long one as well, and I certainly didn't feel safe turning my back on him. I have my other hand on my phone and I'm shaking, so I'm struggling with gloves on, but I'm able to call my mum and thank God that she answers. She usually would ignore my calls and be on the phone with her boyfriend. The guy then gets out of his car when he sees that I'm on the phone with someone, and I start immediately sobbing and telling my mum that there's a man out here and I think he's going to hurt us. She comes out running, and the second that she gets closer and he sees her, he bolts back to his car and dashes away. And that's when I noticed another car that was around the corner of the road also dashed away as well. Looking back on this thing, it's even more scary, since if it was just someone who needed to get past said car that was in the middle of the road by our driveway, they would have just either honked or gone on the other lane to pass them. They definitely also saw the entire thing, and they also didn't get out of their car to help us or anything. So it makes me think that they were also in on this entire situation. I was forced to go to school that day, and my mum calls the cops, and when I get home, I found out even more horrible news that just made me realize my gut feeling was absolutely correct. My mum told them the car and how it looked and such, and they found an abandoned car that matched her description just up the road. So they found who it belonged to and eventually found out that he was not a school teacher. He worked on the barges, and the cops said that they thought that it dealt with sex trafficking from the looks of it, and they didn't even catch him since they already left on the boat or whatever. But quite honestly, who knows what would have happened if he had got one of us. I'm assuming that we would have been on that boat and, well, horrible things would have happened. It still makes me angry that he was never caught and possibly other kids were victims of this. It's terrifying, and to this day I refuse to go near that road. I still have reoccurring nightmares from time to time about the whole situation. I'm always on alert now too, which I most definitely should have been more alert back then. But hey, I was just a kid and clearly didn't realize how it would have affected me in real time. This was a few years ago. I purchased my childhood home with my husband, and the first couple of years, we had a toxic roommate who would put us against each other, and over time, he ended up staying in his room all the time, falling into a depression. He found a boyfriend and eventually moved out. I wasted no time turning the spare room into a guest quarters. I started having horrible insomnia, so to allow my husband to sleep undisturbed, I moved into the guest room. And this is where things got dark. So I finally found a healthy sleeping pattern, and it was working for me and I was getting some real sleep. That's when the nightmares started though. A clown was in the closet, but not just any clown, a demonic, evil, twisted clown. I'm not afraid of clowns in the slightest, but he kept telling me that I was to be his bride and that I needed to kill everyone that I loved in order to bring him fully into this world. And in my nightmares, I would plan with him and agree. I would wake up, and the weirdest thing would be that the closet door, which had been closed and latched with an old school hook and eye latch, would be wide open and everything in it disheveled. I feared the ex-roommate's depression had opened a doorway for darkness to enter, as he was in a very vulnerable state when he occupied this room. After weeks and weeks of these nightmares every night, I finally decided to cleanse this room. I opened the front door and burned sage. My husband and I both have indigenous ancestry, so the burning of sage is a cleanse our ancestors held sacred. I started in the attic, making certain the smoke touched even the darkest corners, and cleansed room by room. When I began in the spare room though, suddenly the light bulb exploded. The doorknobs rattled. I didn't stop. I pushed until I felt the energy finally leave the home. My husband, who was outside with our dog now, knew when it was over. I never said a word because he saw the darkness shoot out the front door allegedly. We've had no issues since then. The nightmare stopped immediately, the closet door remained closed and latched, but I will never forget the hopelessness and darkness that I felt in those dreams. And I guess that I'll never know why it showed itself to me as a clown. Back in 2009, 4 friends and I were walking home from a basketball game in the suburbs that is near our neighborhood. It was around 8 p.m. and it was pretty dark. There were 2 ways to go in my neighborhood. The first one was the shortcut, which consisted of cutting through the middle of an abandoned paintball park in an open field, and it will take around 10 minutes to arrive to our homes. The second was the long way, which takes 25 to 30 minutes walking in a bright area, surrounded by houses and endless illuminated roads that finished right on the entrance of the abandoned park, and then 5 minutes of walking in semi-illuminated areas again. We took the shortcut though, like we did every time, but this time everything was quiet, no animal sounds. Abandoned dogs took shelter here all the time, so that was odd not to hear them. No cars sounding from anywhere nearby, and it was just pure silence this night. One of my friends decided to just start talking about how it must be really cool to play Ouija boards in the middle of the field as a bit of a joke. We tell him to shut up collectively because we were a little bit on edge, and we all see the entrance of the park and we all start getting less stressed and start talking again. We were about 100 feet from the entrance when we all hear and feel stomps coming from behind us, but not regular stomps, heavy stomps, almost like an elephant or a bull running. We look back and there was this strange-shaped creature with really dim red eyes at first, looking completely dark, but as it got closer it was sort of greyish and charging toward us. We collectively looked at each other and we ran as fast as we could toward the entrance, and we managed to get out of there. While walking, there is a part of the street that briefly overlooks the field, and we all looked to see if we could see anything down there, but all we saw was dim red dots looking directly at us, we think at least. We all went home, and the next day we tried to figure out what actually happened. 4 out of 5 of us can confirm this story, and sadly one of my friends passed away a couple of years ago. I also moved, but have to travel every weekend through that area to visit my family, and whenever I go by that place, it still gives me the creeps going through there at nighttime. I'm a 20-year-old man from the Philippines, and even though this incident occurred back in 2013, over a decade ago now, I still find myself haunted by it every time that I return to my hometown. At the time, I was just an 18-year-old college student. It was the night of our department socialization party, which had wrapped up at around midnight. As the only one among my friends with a car, I had always taken on the role of the designated driver. After dropping my friends off at their homes, I was parking in my usual spot, just a few houses away from my own, due to the limited parking in our area. I was about to exit the car when I noticed a girl standing near the entrance of the alleyway leading to my house and several others, wearing a shirt with our department's logo. I assumed that she had just walked back from the party. In front of her, a man in his late 20s, clad in a hoodie, stood ominously, seemingly blocking her path. The girl, she immediately locked eyes with me, and I recognized her expression. It was a silent plea for help. Instinct kicked in. I grabbed my bag and stepped out of the car. The man, noticing my presence, began to walk into the alleyway. When I reached the girl, he had thankfully vanished from sight. It felt as though whatever threatening situation had occurred moments before, that now it was over, and I was tempted to walk away. But then I caught sight of the strange man again. He was leaning against the wall of a nearby house, his gaze fixed on me. A chill ran down my spine, and just then the girl called out from behind me. Her voice trembled with fear, and I saw her approach, visibly shaken. "Can you walk with me to my apartment at the end of the alleyway?" she asked, explaining that the man had been silently blocking her way. I glanced back at the man. He appeared intoxicated, perhaps drunk or maybe even on drugs. We began to walk. Our breaths shallowed as we passed by him. After putting some distance between us, I glanced back. And to my horror, he was now following us. We had already passed my house at that point, but I couldn't leave this girl to face him alone. As fear coursed through me, she suddenly broke into a full sprint, and I had no choice but to keep pace with her. We reached the gate to her apartment, and she hastily swung it open, slamming it shut behind us. We then dashed into the building where a second gate stood, this one smaller, likely designed to keep pets from escaping. She opened it, and we slipped through just as the sound of the man approaching the first gate reached our ears. We bolted up the stairs, making our way to the third floor. Breathless, the girl knocked urgently but softly at her apartment door, and after what felt like an eternity, it swung open, revealing her friends, a guy and a girl around her age. They looked bewildered but quickly locked the door behind us and led us into the bedroom. They turned off the lights, and we all just sort of sat there silently with our hearts pounding. The girl suddenly broke down in tears, recounting the terrifying events to her friends. She revealed that the man had been following her for at least 10 to 15 minutes, and she expressed relief at having seen me. Unsure of what to do next, I called my aunt, who was staying at our house that night. Thankfully, she answered swiftly. I urged her to call the police, and at this time we could now hear the man pacing around the apartment, seemingly looking for us. He was mumbling something that we couldn't quite hear well from the other side of the door. A few minutes later, my phone rang with an unknown number. It was my uncle, who was a policeman, reassuring me that help was on the way. What felt like hours dragged on, and eventually the police did arrive. My uncle instructed me via phone to come downstairs and recount the ordeal to the officers. They informed us that they had seen the man wandering around the gate and eventually into the far end of the alleyway. Once the police had finished their inquiries, they allowed me to go home. I recounted the entire story to my aunt, who urged me to go get some rest. Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me as my mind raced with thoughts of the strange man. I mean, what if he had caught up to us, armed with a knife or some weapon? I fought to dispel the terrifying images racing through my mind, but I just couldn't shake the feeling that he might be watching me in the dark, a knife glinting menacingly in his hand. So my boyfriend has a friend that is about 60 years old that owns a house that was built around the 1800s. The house is in the middle of nowhere, secluded from any other houses for miles. It's the only house in the area surrounded by trees, and to add on to the uncomfortable environment, the house does not have a streetlight since it was built in the 1800s. My boyfriend was told by the lady that she would pay him to watch her house for like 8 months. She was going to Mexico for the winter because she doesn't like the winter very much, so she often goes there and stays with her friends. She said that she would pay him double if he actually stayed in the house. He agreed because he didn't really have much money to begin with, and he had already worked for her, so why not? I was pretty excited too because the lady also made a point that I could stay as well, and I really was eager to get out of my parents' house during the weekends. Those were the only times that I could stay over. My boyfriend started staying the night before me though, and he would always come over to my house and tell me that he's going crazy at the lady's house because he feels dread and like he's just unwelcome there. I, knowing my boyfriend, thought that this was one of his overreactions. He has them in certain situations that he's not familiar with, so I told him that I'm pretty sure that it was fine, but man, I was so wrong. So the first weekend I stayed there, it was okay. I felt a bit off, I guess, but my boyfriend insisted that we check the whole house top to bottom because he felt as though someone was in the house. I didn't think so, but I said okay in the end. So we started checking the house, and we checked every room top to bottom, even the basement that was more like a dungeon, to be honest. And there was nothing. So I told him that there was nothing and to just let it go and to just go to bed. We went into the bedroom and he locked the door and put his knife under his pillow. I didn't ask why in the end because I thought that I knew, and we just went to bed. The next day we packed and we went to town to get some groceries for during the week so that he didn't have to pay for Wendy's for lunch during his shift. We made it back to the house, and it was almost pitch black darkness at this stage. We went around to the back and opened the back door, stepped into the house, closed the door and walked a few inches away from the door. And that was when the doorknob started turning, as if someone was turning it from the outside. But I can assure you that there was nobody there. We bolted out of the house, and we had gone to his parents' house to explain the situation, and his mum gave us a silver necklace. But yes, unfortunately, we had to return a few days later, and this time it was worse. We had arrived when it was dark, and my boyfriend quickly ran to the back and unlocked the door so that he could open up the front sliding door. I had grabbed my stuff and realized that I'd forgotten my phone, so I walked back out the sliding door, and suddenly it just smelled like rotten eggs, and it wasn't the septic or anything rotten like that. My boyfriend even came to see what I was concerned about and smelled it. I retrieved my phone, went back inside, and I went to the bathroom. And it was then that I heard something fall in the kitchen. I ran out after I used the restroom, and I asked my boyfriend what happened, and he said that things started falling off the wall in the kitchen. The lady had these like bird sculptures on the wall, and a couple of them had broken. We eventually did fix them, but we then slept in the truck after that. Now, the next week we came back to the house, and it was 85 degrees in the house, when usually we'd have to wear coats because the lady likes it somewhat cold in there, and it also saves on electricity and all that. We for sure know that we didn't do it, and the lady's other friend hadn't been in the house that week, and also she would never touch the thermostat ever, so we were kind of confused by the temperature. Then we found out that all of the doors were closed. It's not odd for the doors being closed per se, because the lady likes the door closed. Well, all except one during the winter, the laundry in the pantry room, because her pipes would freeze if we didn't keep the door open. But it was closed, and there had been nobody in that home, and we certainly didn't close it too. The next day, my boyfriend was changing his oil, and I had to use the restroom, and it was then that the doorknob started turning, and I honestly thought that it was my boyfriend, but no, he was outside the whole time. Then when I opened the door, the basement started creaking open. And yes, the basement does have wind drafts, but hear me out, because the whole house except for the kitchen has this thick carpet, so it would have been impossible for the door to creep open against the carpet with small airflow like that. The following week, though, we felt as if we were more in danger than previously. We got so uncomfortable that we had to stop going there in the end, and my boyfriend the previous weeks had already stopped staying there alone after the first incident of the doorknob turning. It was nearly impossible to stay there, even when we constantly came back, but we wanted to watch her house, and it wasn't just for the money, but for the lady too. We eventually actually heard that the lady had an experience where she woke up for work early in the morning. It was dark and she went out to start her car, and she was in the car when she heard something knock on her car window. Apparently she went out and looked around, but she didn't find anyone. May I remind you too that her house is literally in the middle of nowhere, miles away from any other home, so why and how would anyone be knocking on her car window in the pitch darkness in the very early morning like that? She doesn't believe in the paranormal, but she has definitely had weird things going on in that home, and she admits it. Anyway, I just wanted to share these experiences of the most haunted house that I have certainly ever stayed at. So before I get into the actual experiences, there's some important context that I need to get out of the way. I work part-time as a cleaner at a clothing outlet. The actual building is huge, but only about 40% is the floor where we sell clothes and such. The remainder of the building is office space and sort of this huge warehouse, I guess. Most of my co-workers have stated having experiences when walking into the warehouse portion of the building, which is kept dark most of the time, as when I come in, everyone who works back there has usually gone home. Now, the important part of this warehouse is that after walking into the warehouse past this metal gate, to the immediate left is the building's custom embroidery station, and to the right, there are 2 industrial dumpsters. In front of the gate, separated by a portion of the warehouse, is a long hallway containing the offices and employee bathrooms. And this hallway is always kept lit and goes all the way to the back of the main warehouse. So, the actual encounter that I wanted to talk about is that it was the middle of my shift and I was going to the employee bathrooms because I didn't want to hold up the ones on the actual floor. I walked to that long hallway that I mentioned, and I looked down into the dark warehouse, which is only partially illuminated on the other end by the light from another hallway. And that was when I see it. There are racks full of clothes at the other end. I myself am about 5'9", and these racks are about a head and a half taller than me, so I'd put them at about 6 to 6'2" in height. But there is something standing, barely illuminated at the end of that hall, poking what must be its head above the racks. It's like when you see a shadow moving out of the corner of your eye, but instead I was looking dead at it. Its head was amorphous, a blurry shape, but it was easily taller than these racks, when I immediately see it pull back an arm from beside the rack and duck away out of sight without a sound. 2 of my co-workers, one of which being brand new and the other being my manager, both reported having an experience exactly like this too, seeing something duck away out of sight. There are plenty more experiences that I've had in this back warehouse, but this one has been the one that's always been nagging me the most. So, is anyone familiar with what this could have been? This same building's been a clothing outlet since way before I got my job, easily since a few years before 2000. All of us employees who have encountered this specific thing have just been calling it the ghost, but quite honestly, we have no idea what it actually is. For some background, I live in the Southern California area. I've always been a little bit sensitive to paranormal things, but on this one, I'm completely stumped. After I graduated college, I had to move in with my parents for some time. I'd been there since, but it hadn't been too long, and I haven't spent much time in this house prior to this. It was bought while I was in college, so only holidays really. But in the last couple of months, I've had a lot of paranormal things happen, such as doors closing, hearing noises, shadow figures, etc. What I would call the basic paranormal activity for someone sensitive to this, that's what's been happening to me. My boyfriend has had and witnessed several of these things happen as well, and this past weekend, it all sort of came to a head and there was more weird activity than normal. For context, my family has been out of town and it was just the 2 of us. The first experience this weekend, maybe around 11 p.m., I went to turn off the lights around the house and I 100% was sure that this very tall, dark figure was just kind of standing there. Being sensitive to this stuff, it didn't necessarily surprise me to see something, but it surprised me to see something so clearly in this house, particularly since it's usually just noises and a few shadows here and there that you sort of see out of the corner of your eye. And this, it definitely shook me a little bit. Caught off guard, I should probably say, since I just ignored it and eventually I just went to bed. The second event, though, was the following day. My boyfriend was in the garage working on something and I was in the kitchen cooking dinner. The way that the house is set up is that the kitchen and the living areas are on the 2nd floor. As I was cooking out of the corner of my eye, I saw my boyfriend come up the stairs and go into the laundry room. It was definitely him. I mean, I didn't see his face, just the back of him walk in there, but I could tell that it was him. I called out, letting him know that I had put his laundry in the dryer already, assuming that that's what he went in there for. But I got no response. so I figured that he probably had headphones on and I just sort of continued cooking. I didn't see him go back down the stairs, but I thought that I'd heard him going back down there, so I just chalked it up to, again, headphones. Anyway, about 20 minutes later, he comes back up and I asked if he heard me talking to him, and he told me that he hasn't been upstairs since I had started cooking. We back and forth on this and, well, you get the picture. I mentioned both of these events as maybe, well, they're related in some way or something. There isn't too much activity in the house other than what I mentioned, doors closing, weird noises, etc. I've only personally seen shadow figures every so often and just sort of peeking around things in this house. I had never seen something stand before me like that before. My best guess was maybe a mimic. I don't know much about those in particular, but all of this just seems a little bigger than what I had experienced in this house before. I'm wondering if maybe someone has some insight about, well, what could possibly be going on here, why all of a sudden, why it's ramping up seemingly, and also if there's anything that I can do about it. This happened in early February of 2005 in Concord, VA. I wasn't a true believer until, well, I saw what I saw. Even though it was almost 20 years ago now, it's something that I think about often. It literally changed my whole life in the matter of 5 seconds. Since then, I have also become somewhat sensitive to things that I can only explain as supernatural. So, let me set the scene. I was a super young mother to my first daughter who would turn 1 later that month. We used to live on this old curvy road where one end brings you to Lynchburg and the other to Appomattox. Like every morning back then, I was heading to Lynchburg, but of course I was speeding to make it on time to work for 5 in the morning. There was this part of the trip where it had super sharp curves that were snake-like, with an uphill at the end of the snake. There would always be huge packs of deer in this area, so you literally go 5 miles an hour with all the curviness, plus the deers. This strip of road didn't have any houses for at least 3 miles each way as well. Now, even though it was 20 years ago, I still remember every single little detail of this moment. Like the outside temperature was 17 degrees, to Usher's Confessions Part 2 was on the radio with the time being 4:43 in the morning. I remember the vanilla tree car freshener. I even remember what underwear I had on. Maybe that's too much information, but it's just kind of crazy that I even remember that stuff. In any case, I was speeding until I got to the stop of the snake and slowed to a basic crawl. But as I was entering the top of the snake, Usher started coming in and out of the speakers while my whole dash was slowly sort of dimming. Of course, I had a bit of a mini panic attack, thinking that my car was dying, but was confused because I still had plenty of power when I stepped on the gas. But by the second curve, I got the most intense feeling that I have ever had. I can only explain it as pain, sadness, fear, coldness, and just the feeling of being utterly lost. All I could do was bawl my eyes out, like a full-grown woman crying like a baby. And as I reached my last curve before the uphill, I saw him. I saw him leaning against the hill that was right next to the road. I first noticed his bare feet with his grey tattered pants. My first thought was, wait, it's the middle of winter. Where are this guy's shoes? But then I see his grey, thin, strange jacket, one that I'd never seen something like that before in my life. As I slowly made my gaze to his face, I realized suddenly that he didn't have a face, but rather just a shadow. I literally could make out every other detail but his face. It was just gone. Now, you know if you're going slow enough and you sort of hit your brakes, the red glow can see what's behind you in the mirrors? Well, this guy was just gone. And so were all those emotions that I had 2 seconds ago. I got out of there and drove on, and I made it to work, with only being 2 minutes late. That day after work, I decided to walk around downtown historical buildings, something I've never really done in the 5 months that I've worked there. That was the day that I learned what the Civil War soldiers actually looked like, and discovered my road was apparently used as a trail back in the day. I also had no clue that when a soldier would die that they would steal anything useful off of the fallen soldiers. Now, I know what I saw that day, and I can't tell who or what side that soldier came from, because even though I thought that I'd seen the color gray, it was really just a ghost. And I mean, do they even really have colors? I've lived on this property since I was 2 years old, and when I was little, I thought that it was normal to play with people who weren't really there. I thought that it was normal to play with people who weren't really there. I guess I chalked it up to being what imaginary friends meant. As I got older, I stopped playing so much. I got tired and was a typical moody teen, but I never mentally stopped thinking of the people that I played with as spirits and ghosts. I also never told anyone about this. But here's where things got weirder. I'm mentally ill and I experience hallucinations. I also have a form of dissociative identity disorder. At the time, I was the only personality, and I had just started recovering memory of being a system, trauma reasons. So when I started hallucinating figures and feeling people in my head, I thought it was just the system reforming. Around the same time, my older brother's life partner came to visit. She actually sees an FBI psychic fairly often, apparently, and for years the psychic had been asking if she knew of a specific property. You may see where this is going, but sure enough, the property that they'd been talking about for years is the same one that I grew up on and live on still. A fun fact about the area that we live: we're only a few miles away from the old asylum. It is appropriately spooky feeling, even if it looks normal, but the FBI psychic and my sister-in-law asked to do a cleansing on the property. So the whole family ends up working out there where the corners of our property are, and bringing containers of salt there. Sister-in-law warns us that we might feel weird that night as they do the cleansing. That night I get really sick as well. I sleep poorly, have hot flushes and nightmares, and when I wake up in the morning, I suddenly feel lighter and emptier than I've ever felt before. I also no longer from that point on felt or hallucinated ever again. I spent the entire morning trying to wrap my head around the idea that my brain was apparently haunted or something. We later heard from the psychic and my sister-in-law that our property became a place of solace for spirits from the asylum apparently, and they helped the spirits move on to heal. Later, my sister-in-law came and found me. She told me that the spirits I played with as a kid wanted me to know that they'd apparently come back one day to say goodbye properly. She also told me that my biological maternal grandma was watching over me, but she also tried to kidnap me when she was alive, so I mostly ignored that part. But the weird thing is that, like I said, I'd never told any of this to anyone. It was really nice to know, though, that the people that I played with were actually real, that they came here to feel safe, that they cared about me as much as I adored them as a kid. Also, I now have the best wild story to tell at parties, I suppose. No one can beat, yeah, my brain was haunted for a bit. I've been on the fence about these experiences as I just cannot explain them. There's probably a reasonable explanation for some of them, but as they started happening more frequently, It became kind of a commonly discussed topic between me and my co-workers. So for context, I worked at a pet store. The store was quite large, and the building was decently old. I was frequently put on the closing shift, which meant that it was just me and one other person for the last hour in the store. The last half an hour was always closed to customers, as we used that time to clean up and count the tills and all that. We'd always heard little thumps around the store that sounded similar to footsteps, but I always brushed that off as the ventilation and the animals in the store. Me and my one co-worker, Amy, would always joke about the place being haunted. Things started getting less explainable, though, when my manager told us one of her experiences. One day we were short-staffed, so it was just 4 of us running the store. Me and the other 3 were all up near the cash register, and my manager was in her office. The bathroom and the office are right next to each other, and you can hear pretty clearly any conversation being held in the office from that bathroom. My manager had gone into the bathroom, and when she came out, she came up to the cash register and asked if anyone had just been in the office. Obviously, we hadn't. She looked concerned, though, and told us that she had heard someone talking to her dog and calling his name, but there had been nobody in the office at the time with him. That was when things really started getting strange, too. Not long after that, we had switched to holiday hours, so me and Amy had to stay in the store for an extra hour and a half alone. That was fine, though. I mean, we always had fun, as barely anybody would come in, so we would honestly just chat, buy snacks, and just hang out around the store. But one night, we decided to do a little ghost hunt. We, as a joke, started using the TikTok filter, which shows a person's silhouette. The filter was supposed to detect somebody and turn them into a character or whatever. But if you took pictures of empty spaces, sometimes it would show a silhouette without anybody being in the shot. We messed around with that for a little while, and took some pictures which showed 2 faceless people standing in the aisle in front of us. It spooked us a little bit, but neither of us really believed the filter. A little bit later, we were in an aisle facing the groomer's room. She was messing around on her phone with the filter, and I was sitting on a pallet of dog food in the aisle. The grooming room had a glass window, so you could see into the room pretty clearly. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a blackish-grey circular orb quickly float down from the top of the corner of the grooming room and disappear halfway down. It was very quick, and I wasn't quite sure what I had seen, so I didn't mention it to Amy. We sat there in silence for a couple of moments, and she broke the silence with, "Did you just see that?" I was still skeptical, so I asked her what she had seen, and she said that it was some kind of grey orb. I got chills and quickly got 2 pieces of paper from the till and said, "Okay, I'm going to draw what I saw, and you draw what you saw, and we'll compare after." We drew the same odd shape that we had seen, and for the rest of the night, we were pretty spooked. I'm not sure if there's an explanation for that, but it definitely had us both a bit scared. The only other thing that happened in that store was when the power went out and we were all stuck waiting for it to come back on with the store closed. We had quickly run out of work to do, so we were all sort of hanging out with the manager, goofing around. We decided to open up one of the UV lights that we had on the shelf and look around the store for fun. The flashlight didn't have any batteries, so me and the manager went back into the office to get some. When we went into the office, we heard a distinct banging in the ceiling, which stopped us both. The power had been out for a couple of hours at that point, so we didn't know what we were hearing. We both stood there for a second listening to it. She spoke up asking me, "What is that?" and the noise abruptly stopped. We didn't hear it again after that, and we grabbed the batteries and went back out into the sales floor. I guess I just wanted to share my experiences at my old job, as weird as they are. The activity became really quiet when Amy quit for some reason. I'm not sure if it was because we were messing around and calling it out, but I definitely was scared to be in that store alone from that point on. When I was an angsty teenager, I moved in with my mother and stepdad to escape a, less than desirable situation. Because of the move, I was enrolled in a new school. This school was located in one of the sketchiest neighborhoods in the city. Everyone who resided in that area was relatively low income, my family included. We had a rec center near the school that was a hotspot for, let's call them undesirables, which was primarily teenage boys wandering over from the nearby high school to catcall the girls. Lunchtime was my favorite. I loved going outside for chow and having sweaty teenage boys ask for the nasty. Anyway, during my time at my terrible school, I made an array of friends. However, there was one person who became my best friend. Her name was Blondie. She and I got along like, what's a negative connotation? I was a people pleaser, I guess, and she took advantage of that. Blondie was nice enough, I suppose, but she was problematic. Regardless, we were fast friends and thus began our very short-lived friendship. Over the school year, she mainly came over to my house since I was an only child. We usually had the house to ourselves while my folks were at work. However, she finally invited me to her house around the middle of the school year. I was super excited. I'd always wanted to meet her family since they were all such an enigma. Blondie wasn't one to divulge information about her home life. All I knew was that she lived with her mother, stepdad, and younger sibling. I'm unsure if she was embarrassed or didn't care to share, but I finally had the honor of meeting them. Honestly, too, her family was amazing. They were kind and treated me really well. Not to mention her stepdad was a phenomenal cook, the best spaghetti and meatballs I'd ever had. After that, I started going to her house more, and you know what? I really enjoyed it. But fast forward to a month or two before the end of the school year, and it's Blondie's birthday. Her family was throwing a little get-together at their house, and I was invited. Blondie and we headed to her house after school, and it was a really fun time. Until near the end of the day. Now, I knew next to nothing about her biological father at this point. I knew that he wasn't really in the picture. He'd sometimes drop by and say hello, but I had never personally met him. That was until he had made a surprise visit to give Blondie a present. When I tell you that there was a shift in the atmosphere, I cannot stress just how much this was the fact. I could immediately feel it, and I was a dumb kid. We were inside the living room, eating some cake, and there was a knock at the front door. Blondie's mum answered, and her face, which once had a nice smile, suddenly turned into a scowl. If looks could kill, man, that dude would be dead. She moved aside, though, and this man walked in. I'll never forget how everyone in the room got tense, except for Blondie, who excitedly greeted her dad. At the time, he seemed like a normal-ish dude, I suppose. Maybe a tad bit on the creepier side, but, who am I to judge? Blondie introduced me to her father, and we shared some pleasantries. At one point, I was invited to get some ice cream with them the following day, which I accepted. I was getting free ice cream. Of course I was going to say yes. He eventually left, and we all got back to eating cake. I had honestly forgotten about the visceral reaction everyone had upon seeing him. Who knows, too? Maybe if I had remembered, I would have said no. Anyway, the following day rolled around, and I went for ice cream with Blondie and her dad. I cannot remember much from that day, other than him asking me if I had a boyfriend or a girlfriend, which seems innocent enough, I suppose, but the way he asked it made me feel a bit weird. I honestly cannot remember much from any of the other encounters with this man. Nothing really jumps out to me. I know that I went out with him and Blondie a few more times before my family moved to another city, and we lost touch. Fast forward a few years, and I'm attending college. I had managed to stay in contact with one person from my middle school days. Her name was Teddy. She had reached out to me one day, asking if I wanted to go and see a movie, which I happily accepted. I was pretty deep into the big sad at that time, and I needed a pick-me-up. A film with an old friend was just what I needed, I thought. I took the train to a nearby mall, and Teddy and I watched the movie. After, we headed to the food court and we got some chow. We were catching up. It had been a couple of years since we last saw each other, when Teddy suddenly perked up. She asked me if I heard about Blondie's father, to which I said that we hadn't been in contact since I had moved. Teddy's face lit up, and she told me the most mind-blowing story my little brain had ever heard. She informed me that Blondie's father had murdered a woman, apparently. Now, before I continue, she was going based on word of mouth while she was telling me all of the details. Teddy had no news articles or police reports to back her story up. She was told by a friend who heard from someone else, apparently, and so on and so forth. But what she told me in the end wasn't actually far from the truth. According to her, Blondie's father had taken the life of a street worker. He got away with it for 2 years, and his truck got him caught. Apparently, there was something unique about it. Teddy couldn't tell me much more because she genuinely didn't know. I remember going back to my dorm and trying to Google for more details, but I couldn't find anything about it. I eventually forgot about the story until last year, and I was discussing the craziest stories from my life with a friend when I suddenly remembered Teddy's story. After some digging, too, I finally found an article that described the crime. I clicked on it, and when I saw the picture of the man, well, words cannot describe what I felt. Everything Teddy had told me was true, but it was so much worse than what she and I thought. Out of respect for the victim and her family, I won't describe what he did, but he was arrested 3 years after he had taken her life. I can't find any information about how he was caught, but it had something to do with his truck. He was charged with manslaughter, he took a plea bargain and indignity to a body, and only served 7 years of his 14-year sentence. He had served half already because he was in custody during the trial. I looked him up again not too long ago, and I learned some unsettling information which prompted me to share this here. He was released from prison a few months ago, and guess what he did? He killed another woman. From what I've heard, it had similarities to the other murder he committed. This time around, he's charged with second-degree murder and indignity to a body. There's unfortunately still not a lot of information about the second woman, but both of his victims were mothers. They both were cruelly taken from this world, and I still cannot wrap my mind around all of this. I mean, I met this monster. I was best friends with his daughter. I don't think I was personally in any danger, but the fact that I met someone capable of such heinous crimes, it honestly scares me. I can't even begin to imagine just how Blondie must have felt after learning of her father's crimes. Anyway, I apologize for being a bit vague regarding the crimes, but again, I don't want to disrespect these people. I know some of you really want to know everything, but it just didn't feel right to share their story, especially since it had little to do with me. I mean, I was just the schmuck that was friends with the daughter. Also, I would like to provide more information about how Blondie is, but I cannot remember her last name for the life of me. She doesn't share the same one as her dad, so I really have no way of finding her or contacting her. But regardless, if you've made it this far, then thanks for listening. When I was still knee-high-ish, my grandmother, Tilly, and I used to go on yearly road trips either across our own country or the one next to ours. We live relatively close to the border. Well, on this particular occasion, we decided to travel across our neighboring country. Let's call my home country A and the neighboring country B. My grandmother had a friend in the more yeehaw part of the country B that she hadn't seen in a minute, and after some planning, they figured out the best time for the two of us to make our trip. I was really excited when my grandmother first told me about the trip. I had no idea where we were going, but the idea of going on a road trip with Gram was really exciting. I fast forward a few months and we finally hop in the car and head off on our merry way. The trip would take about a week and my grandmother wanted to see all the neat stuff along the way. Traveling with a child such as myself required a lot of pit stops as well. I wasn't necessarily a bad traveling companion, but I just had a small bladder at the time. Anyway, we were on the last stretch of the trip when my grandmother had to pull into a gas station to fill up. We were practically running on fumes at this point, and I really had to go to the bathroom. We pulled into this middle of nowhere gas station, and after my grandmother had filled up the car, we hurried inside so I could empty my bladder. And the moment that we walked inside, all the alarm bells in my tiny brain suddenly went off. I had no idea why I was feeling the way I was, up until I set eyes on the clerk. Now, I'm not usually one to judge a person by how they present themselves, but old boy, what I'll be calling him from here on out, looked like he walked straight out of a serial killer documentary. Currently, we're smack down in the center of Yeehaw territory, in the middle of nowhere, and this man looks like he should be selling you high-end cars, not working at a rundown gas station. Old boy was giving me all kinds of bad vibes. I really don't know how to explain it other than that as well. But worse still, he was already smiling a little too widely when he spotted my grandmother. She was petite, blonde, and beautiful. Granted, I'm a bit biased, but she is my grandma. However, when he saw me, you could have sworn he was looking at a Sunday dinner. Somehow, his already very wide grin only grew. Remembering it, even to this day, gives me the heebie-jeebies. Thankfully, Gram could sense a disturbance in the force and shielded me from this predatory gaze. She paid for the gas and asked for the key to the washroom, which he took his sweet time getting. She walked with me to the bathroom, which was disgusting by the way, and I quickly did my business and we returned the key with great reluctance. But here is where things got progressively worse. When we were piling back into the car, old boy closed down the shop and got into his car. It doesn't seem too weird, right? Sure, he was super creepy, but he hasn't done anything too odd yet. Now, technically, we had 2 days left on the trip. My grandma would drive in increments. 4 hours on the road, an hour off to explore, fill up, etc. Then we'd find an inn or a motel, and we'd spend the night. We traveled about maybe 8 hours a day before turning in for the night. And well, when we left the gas station, old boy followed us for, I kid you not, the rest of the entire trip. At first, we just assumed that he was heading in our general direction. It was just the one road after all. But after the third turnoff and old boy was still tailing us, my grandmother finally realized that we were being followed. This man then proceeded to follow us for, and I wish I were joking, 12 hours. My grandmother refused to stop driving unless it was absolutely imperative. For anyone wondering why she didn't just call for help or why she didn't pull into a police station or something, don't worry, you're not the only one. To be perfectly fair to my grandmother, she didn't have a phone, and despite somewhat knowing where she was, it was still pretty much unknown territory. She wanted to get to a familiar surrounding, so there wasn't the risk of getting lost, I think, and we finally made it to the city where her friend resided, and that's when we pulled into a police station. The mad lad pulled up next to our car, just as we headed inside the building as well, and watched us. I don't know what old boy was taking, but he sat there while my grandma talked with the lovely lady at the desk. Thankfully, the cops handled the creepy man with ease, but I'll never forget that smile that never left his face while he was being escorted away. Needless to say, that was the last time that we road tripped to Country B, and one of the last times that we actually took a road trip in general. So, the other day, leaving my friend's house, I accidentally backed into a brick mailbox. My bike rack hit the mailbox, so my car was okay, but completely demolished the mailbox. No big deal though, right? That's why we have insurance. I went to the neighbor and told them what happened and gave them my insurance details, phone number and name. All I got was his first name, but from the get-go, this dude was pretty creepy. He kept hitting on me, trying to date me, specifically trying to feed me. I left on my drive to my mum's. I'm attending out-of-state college and parents are divorced. And the guy I backed into, Robert, began to text me and call me. He was insistent that it was better for both of us to just pay out of pocket for the mailbox, sending me links to companies that could fix it for like $500, and demanding that I go on a date with him so I could give him the cash for the repair and he could feed me. I don't know what his deal with food was, but I declined everything but started to get annoyed by his constant texts and calls. Finally, after 2 days of it, with my responses only, "Please contact my insurance," I sent him a text saying that he was harassing me at this point. I blocked him, but he made a new number and threatened to report it as a hit and run to the police. I'm in law school, okay, and this was not a hit and run. I blocked the second number, and then he used a new number to ask me if I wanted him to send a screenshot or a video of the accident to his insurance. I admit, this made me angry. I called this number and dug my nails so hard into my thigh that I drew blood as he threatened reporting things, asking me on a date, and trying to entice me to just pay cash. I finally screamed at him to get lost and to never contact me again. My dad heard me and was upset that I said that to someone that I was in an accident with, and that I said that to a guy who thought that I was cute and just wanted a date. And then I blocked the third number. Next day, he reaches out again to tell me that I gave him the wrong policy number. I told him that I didn't, but he then said that it would be easier to pay cash, that I was the problem, etc. He was talking to his insurance, I guess, and began trying to validate my info. He had my mum's name, address, and phone number. I verified it, told him to not contact me again, and blocked his new number. The next morning, super early, I get a text basically saying that he finished the claim and I was awful for making it harder than it needed to be by going through insurance and not going on a date with him. He then included, "You're so beautiful and ugly at the same time. Don't take risks. Stay on the good path. Goodbye." At this point, I got a little bit scared because this was the fifth number that I had to block. Then at midnight, he texts me, "Are you up? I know where you live. Don't try and screw me over on insurance. I'll report you as a hit and run. You should have just gone on the date with me." I took the phone to my dad, showed him the text, and I filled him in. My dad, a pretty scary dude, then calls the guy. He answered, "Shoot, I knew you were into me, but do you want to come over?" My dad got pretty mad at that. He said that he was going beyond harassment, that this was his final warning to not contact me, that he didn't care how he reported it, etc. Robert began saying that I came on to him and offered sex as payment, invited him to my house and was horny or whatever. Instantly, we blocked him, police were contacted, insurance was notified, all that stuff. Next day, I talked to insurance, protective order was filed, got another text telling me that I shouldn't have involved police, blocked the seventh number, notify police, go to stay at my dad's place because dude doesn't have this address. My dad is a very tall and very scary dude who loves his Second Amendment. But late last night, watching Star Wars with my dad and older brother, the doorbell rings. Dad goes to see who it was, and I kid you not, it was Robert with a trash bag filled with things that I apparently left at his house. At this point, I call the police. My dad goes ballistic, all the things. Police came and they arrest the guy. The bag? Well, it was filled with lingerie, a knife, lip balm, and a Dita Von Tess fetish book. I just met with an attorney and, plot twist, the guy doesn't own the house. He is actually an illegal immigrant, is married, and is also being deported. I feel awful that he's being deported, but I genuinely think that he wanted to, well, assault me or perhaps kill me or something. I go back to school in a few days, and I'm actually pretty terrified that he or someone else will follow me there. I think that my house is haunted. The first instance I had was, I was probably like 13 at the time. We had just moved into my house and my family went out to eat, but I didn't really want to since it was late and I don't like eating too late. This means that it was just me in the house. I was sitting down on the sofa with my cat watching a movie when, out of nowhere, I heard a man's voice behind me say, "Here, kitty, kitty." My cat didn't seem to acknowledge it, but I heard it clear as day, and when I turned around, obviously nobody was anywhere to be found. The second instance, I probably was about the same age. I had what I believed to be a trickster demon of some sort around, as I would trip over seemingly nothing and hear laughter right next to me. I would also place things down in my bedroom, only to find them gone, nowhere to be found when I went back for them. Obviously, my first instinct was that my siblings, that they had taken them, but nobody had gone into my bedroom besides me. Eventually, I would just say, "Could you put my item, whatever it was, back here, please? Thank you." And suddenly, when I would walk out of the room and walk back, it would be back exactly where it was before. The third instance, probably about a year or two later, so I was maybe 14 or 15. I was going to go up the mountains behind my house for a hike, but it was dry season, so all the prickly bushes and such were all over the hill. I turned to go back home, and as I'm walking back, I hear indistinct talking and then what sounds like somebody muttering through a megaphone. It sounded like they were right in front of my house. Definitely would have been heard from inside, so I ran inside and asked my mother what all that noise was, but she was like, "What noise?" The fourth instance, about 3 months ago, so I'm 18 at the time, my grandfather had gotten sick in another country and wasn't doing too great. My mother had this weird feeling that he was lost, and I had gone into the den of my house and started pacing a little bit because I have anxiety and that's just what helps me not to panic. As I'm walking, I see out of the corner of my eye somebody following me. Feet behind mine, glimpses of a face when I turn, but only ever out of the corner of my eye, never fully in sight. And upon seeing that, I booked it because that was just way too much. Now, the fifth instance was about a week ago, actually. My mother, sister, and I, coincidentally the only people in my house that believe in the supernatural, were standing near the fireplace talking about whether or not my mother was going to buy my grandfather's ashes from the funeral home in another country. When all of a sudden, we heard a loud bang on the wall and my mother's mailbox, where she keeps letters and bills and such, suddenly fell to the floor. Mind you, that thing was nailed into the wall. I mean, there's absolutely no way that it could move. But the only things that fell out were her checkbook, a pen, and a few old credit cards. We all looked at each other, and I guess my grandfather really wanted her to pay for him, after all. So, I've just moved into this house with my husband almost a month ago. Nothing really started happening that caused any concern for either of us. Until recently, this past week, that is. To start, on Monday, I heard what sounded like light tapping against the wall and what I think was meowing. Logically speaking, I thought maybe it was just the cold that caused the tapping and that the meowing came from outside on the shed next to the house. That is, until I actually thought about it. You see, the meowing sounded like it was actually in our bedroom, in the middle of the night, mind you. On Tuesday, I get the most uncomfortable feeling of being watched, even though I'm alone and my husband is at work. The feeling of even being chased up the stairs. At night, it was like something had hit the trash bag downstairs, and then it sounded like something running up. On Wednesday, I woke up at night from a noise of some kind. It sounded like someone was slamming the edge of a credit card or something on my bathroom counter, which is just outside of my bedroom door. This continues for like 30 to 40 minutes until suddenly it just stops. I peek into the hallway just to make sure that I'm not hearing things and possibly seeing things either. But after that, the sound of something heavy fell into the trash can and started rummaging around again. And today, Thursday, possibly one of the creepiest things that has happened so far, and I know that I'm not going crazy. So, my husband and I were downstairs making breakfast, and I was telling him about what had happened last night. While we were talking, we both went quiet, and I looked at him as if I was terrified because it was the sound of the credit card again, but this time it was in the coat closet, not in the bathroom. Fast forward a few hours when he goes to work and the sound of somebody slamming into my downstairs bathroom takes place. Then came the knocking, around 5 of them. Not continuous, but definitely semi-frequent. I've been extremely jumpy since all of this started happening, and honestly, I just don't know what to do. So, I work pretty late most nights, and sometimes when I need something right away, I have no choice but to go to this store that's the only one open late after work. So, I was driving home and noticed a car behind me super close with their lights really bright. I thought that it was a cop at first, but made a turn and no, it was a small black sedan. Okay, that's a bit weird. I kept going my usual route and start noticing this car's flashing their brights behind me over and over again while following me my whole route home. I know that I didn't drop anything because all I brought in the store were my keys and phone for Apple Pay. The trunk wasn't open or anything either. I was seriously getting weirded out, so I made a fast turn and started going 60 on this back road that I didn't even care about cops anymore. In fact, I actually wanted to be pulled over at this point. And well, this dude was right there behind me, going 60 as well, still flashing his beams. Finally, after about 10 minutes of this, there were these cops in the road doing construction, directing traffic when I looked back and he turned off right away. I have no idea what just happened, but something tells me that whatever it wasn't good. I've had my fair share of dealing with creeps and weirdos in life. Some encounters are not as serious, but creepy nonetheless. But a few years ago, when I was living in Los Angeles, California, I lived next door to a mortuary. Tons of creepy energy from here alone. And right behind my house was a halfway house full of ex-cons, drug addicts, alcoholics, etc. The house was 2 stories and overlooked my backyard. They would play loud rock music early in the mornings, and some of them would sit in the window upstairs to smoke as well. There was one guy in particular, though, who smoked a lot. Almost every other hour, I would see him taking drag after drag from his cigarette, watching my backyard intently. He looked sort of young, I guess, maybe early 30s. He had greasy black hair that I guess he attempted to cut and tidy up somewhat, and scabs or marks all over his colorless face. He also wore black thick-rimmed glasses. He had a deranged sort of psychotic energy, but he wasn't aggressive by any means. Hard to describe. I'm not one to judge anyone in his position, but the way that he would always watch my house and anyone that would come outside to the backyard, it was disturbing to say the least. After a while, I would stop coming out back. He would always be up there, wild, unblinking eyes watching me as I walked around. He never spoke or made a sound, he just sort of watched. One day, though, I was watching movies with my family in the living room. The living room of that house led into the backyard, and there was a window behind one of our couches that faced directly outside. We had the blinds and the windows open, and it was a warm night, sometime in the summer. I was sitting on the couch with the window directly behind me when I thought that I heard something outside, but I wasn't sure. For some reason, I turned around to look out the window, though, and there he was. He was shirtless. I could see scabs all over his upper torso. His eyes were wider than normal. They had a sort of sick, perverted look to them. There was no cigarette or smoke that I could see. His hands were down, out of view. I think he was even nodding his head a little bit, but we stared at each other for a short few seconds before I abruptly closed the blinds and silently continued to watch the movie. I don't think that my family noticed this, and to be honest, I don't know why I didn't speak up, but I had trouble sleeping that night, knowing that he was still over there. Luckily, I don't live in that neighborhood anymore. So, I'm from California, but me and my family lived in Atlanta for about 2 years, from 15 to 17 years old. The entire time living there was, well, a saga within itself, but I can remember one specific incident that was very unsettling. When we arrived in Atlanta, we stayed in a hotel for some months looking for a place to live. There was this handyman who worked at the hotel. He was a white man, maybe in his 40s, large belly, wore glasses, and always dressed in the same camouflage jack that kind of made him resemble a hunter of some sort. He seemed friendly enough. He would always wave and joke around with all the kids and with my parents, and we were very cordial with him. His friendliness started to become a bit excessive towards the end of our stay, though. It got to the point where he would yell up to us from outside of our window. We would call back to him and laugh with him, make light of the situation, but it became uneasy for us when he kept doing it, night after night, patrolling the parking lot. At one point, we just ignored him and turned the light out as if we weren't there. But he became even more aggressive, shouting to us and shining a huge flashlight in our window, whistling up to us and joking about how he knew we were still up there. He had a weird sort of high-pitched laugh mixed with his southern accent that didn't sound like he was playing around. It was more sinister, if anything. It was sort of sadistic, in a Pee Wee Herman kind of way. Hard to describe, but I can't remember everything he said specifically, but there was a comment that he made about us one time that made my father very uneasy. He compared him to someone on Unsolved Mysteries. There were little things that he said about all the kids as well, like how cute we were or something to that effect that never sat well with any of us. It came to a breaking point though one day when we went downstairs to our car and saw a hangman figure drawn in the dust on the back of the window. I'm mixed, as are my siblings. My dad is black and my mum is mixed race. We're in the middle of Atlanta, Georgia, the deep south, in a very awkward position. We're totally new to this state. I've never left the West Coast before that point in my life, and this image creeped everyone in my family out. We knew that he was the one who did it too. My dad confronted him about it, and he played it off, denied that he meant anything by it, and apologized profusely. But the way that he did it was in the same weird, joking manner that he talked to us with, so it was very hard to take it seriously. This, and the fact that this hotel was robbed at gunpoint in the same week, motivated us to leave immediately. I never did see this man again, though we had many other insanely creepy experiences down south. And after a while, we ended up just coming back to California, and we never looked back. I have hundreds of stories from my father about paranormal encounters that he's had, but He has two of them concerning what I believe to be skinwalkers. Both of these take place in the southeast during the late 80s or 90s. To begin with, my dad is Native American and spent a lot of his childhood and early adulthood out in the middle of nowhere. Now, the first one, my dad was walking around in the woods of a reservation with his friends. His friends were back at the car. He was walking about 50 feet away from them when he saw another native man behind a bush, but he could immediately feel that something was wrong with him. The guy had no clothing as far as he could see, no jewelry or makeup or anything distinguishing. His hair was pulled back into a ponytail. They held eye contact for a long time. He said it felt like hours, but was in reality probably less than a minute and a half. He was sort of temporarily frozen with fear as well. He called for his friends, but none of them came. He turned to face them, then he looked back and the man was just gone. Within seconds, noiselessly. No sign that there was anyone there at all to begin with. The second, though, is definitely a lot closer to what most people think of when they hear about skinwalkers. My dad was out in a secluded forest when he heard a piercing scream very close by. He described it as a mix of a native throat cry, the sort of ah-yah sound, sort of mixed with that feral cat or hurt bird sort of sound. They brushed it off the first time, but then they heard it a second time. It was just as close as it had been before, despite them moving. They decided to get out of there at that point. It was deafening and about 10 seconds long, he said. It happened about 3 times as they were leaving, never once sounding any farther away or any closer. When I was 18 to 19, I was living on my own for the first time. As a freshman in college, our days consisted of going to class in the mornings, then getting Chipotle, then going back to the apartment and smoking weed for the rest of the day or night. It was nearly every single day that we did this. Actually, no, not even nearly. That was literally exactly what we did every single day. Me and my roommate, his name was James, had a close friend from high school who would stay with us often. His name was Tyler. Tyler would come over to smoke at our apartment pretty regularly, since we had a safe place to do it away from his parents' house where he was living at the time. One night, Tyler was over and we were smoking per usual, and decided to go walk around the apartment complex. It wasn't late, maybe 8 p.m., but as we were walking, a pair of guys who looked to be a little older than us approached and asked us if we had any weed. James, the dullard of the group, immediately said something along the lines of, "Yeah, we could get you some." Tyler and I were already in the process of saying no when he said that to them, as we lived in a state where you actually had to be really careful about weed. Next thing we know, James has invited the 2 guys into our apartment to smoke with us, and this despite our discontent. Remember too that we're 18 and 19 at the time, high and just as stupid as anyone can be. Anyway, the 2 guys come into the apartment, we smoke, and the whole time they're just being sort of weird. One of the guys keeps making jokes that he's an undercover cop, saying stuff like, "Notice how I'm not inhaling all the way? Undercover cops can smoke weed, but as long as they don't inhale, then it's fine." Now, in retrospect, these guys were just a little older than us and were totally messing with us by saying stuff like that. But it freaked Tyler and I out a lot. So much so that after the 2 guys left, we insisted on going and hiding our bags of weed before the inevitable police raid rained down on us. A quick disclaimer here, I know that we were stupid for actually thinking that they were cops, but we didn't know any better at the time. We were paranoid and all we could think about was the possibility of getting a misdemeanor weed conviction, which carried a $1,000 fine and a 1-year probation. Well, those 2 guys do not end up being the creepy part of the encounter. You see, Tyler and I, in a state of weed-induced paranoia, decided to go and hide our backpack full of weed in the woods outside of the apartment complex until we could confirm that our apartment would not be raided. By this point, it's probably about 1:30 in the morning. We set off on our journey into the woods, hide the weed, and identify a few landmarks to ensure that we can find it again. Because, Lord forbid, we lose even an ounce of weed, right? We feel a lot better after hiding the evidence and set back towards the apartment. We re-enter the complex and are walking along jovially towards my unit. As we're rounding the corner to my building, I then hear the sound of pant legs of athletic pants sweeping together as if somebody is running. No, sprinting up behind us. Before we can even turn around, we hear a deep voice yell from behind, "Get on the ground." I turn around long enough to see a masked man pointing a pistol right at us. We both immediately hit the deck as he screams at us to give him all of our money. Needless to say, we were 18 years old and weren't exactly carrying large amounts of cash on us. But we emptied our pockets, although all we had were our cell phones and empty wallets. He became increasingly angry and told us to get up and face away from him. Now, this was obviously already a scary situation, but this is when it got extremely terrifying for both of us. Just a couple of days before this, 2 teens had been brutally murdered in our area in the same fashion, forced to face away from their killer, and ultimately shot execution style in cold blood. And they hadn't caught the guy yet. It was all either of us could think about in that moment, as it was a highly publicized crime that everyone in our area had heard about. I know that I'm totally outing my general location right now, but I know people are going to want to know what case I'm referring to. Plus, neither of us live in that area anymore, or even that state. So look up Jeffrey Hazelwood murders online for more context. But there is a happy ending to this, because the guy proceeds to instruct us to walk. He walks behind us all the way to the exit of the apartment complex, and as we exited, we heard the sound of running again, this time away from us. We slowly turn around and realize that he's gone. But we were still so freaked out that we kept walking and called a friend to come and pick us up from a nearby Waffle House. To this day, I'm really glad that only psychologically rather than physically, we were harmed by that ordeal that night. Oh, and by the way, we went back to the woods first thing the next morning and picked up the backpack in order to continue our era of stoner degeneracy. This happened about 3 years ago, but I still think about it from time to time and it still creeps me out. So, I, a 21-year-old male at the time, had just moved into a new apartment on the first floor of a building. It was late one night, and my roommate was out when somebody knocked on the door. This was not uncommon, as we were in college, and my roommate had friends that would come by to hang out at all hours of the day. I just figured that it was one of his friends, so I get up and I check the peephole. Staring right back at me through the peephole is an eyeball pressed against it, though. Again, though, this is also something that one of our friends might do, just to be funny. I sort of chuckled and opened the door, surprised to see a guy in his mid-20s that I didn't recognize. He was strange as well, to say the least. He was very hyper almost, and immediately launched into a door-to-door salesman type pitch. I can't remember exactly what he was even selling, but it was something about the local university, which I also attended at the time. The whole time he was talking, he kept looking past me into the apartment. He was fidgeting and even standing on his tiptoes to see inside. Still, I just thought the guy was weird and nervous and might not even be all there or whatever. I politely declined to buy anything from him, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. I finally had to be pretty stern in telling him that I wasn't interested. He finally accepted defeat, and as I was closing the door, he put his hand out and stopped the door from closing. Before I can be like, "What the heck, dude?" he smiles at me and says, "I like Mario Kart on Nintendo 64 too." Now, me and my roommate had been staying up late into the night playing Mario Kart 64 in my bedroom for like the past several days before that, but there was nothing that he could see from the apartment entrance that had anything to do with Mario Kart. I was taken aback by that, and trying to add things up in my head, and confusingly asked, "How do you know I play Mario Kart?" He then got super nervous and said, "Oh, I just thought anyone with a couch like that would be into Mario Kart on the Nintendo 64, because, you know, it's like a retro game and that's a retro couch." I mean, what the heck sort of explanation is that, right? Then he was like, "Oh, okay, bye," and literally scurried away. I shut the door and I locked it. I start trying to put the pieces together on how he could have known that, because obviously it wasn't because of my grandma's old couch. Remember too that it's a first floor apartment that backed up to the woods. My roommate got home shortly after that, and I immediately tell him about the encounter. He was freaked out too, and so we started investigating. At first, it seemed as if there was no way to even see inside my bedroom. I mean, my blinds were always down. We went outside and tested it and found that the only way to see inside would have been if you had your face right up against the window, and even then you kind of had to crouch and close one eye just to get a glimpse of the inside. A couple more creepy details as well is that my window was over a balcony, and the Nintendo 64 console itself was stored inside of the TV stand. It wasn't even visible, which means that you'd only be able to see while we were actively playing, which we never did until we were a little bit stoned and it was like 2 a.m. So basically, this creep had been jumping the railing to our balcony, pressing his face against my window, and watching us play Mario Kart in the middle of the night for who knows how long. I never did see that guy again, but needless to say, I was pretty paranoid for a while after that. I constantly checked my windows and woke up in the middle of the night paranoid that he was standing just a couple of feet away, watching me sleep. It was just a very unsettling encounter, I guess. I'm glad that nothing more ever really came of it and that I never saw him again, but I have always wondered exactly what his motives were. When I was really little, from ages 1 to 5, we lived in a small mountain town in the middle of nowhere. It was the kind of town that truckers would stop at for a bite to eat, the kind of town that you'd pass through on your way to somewhere else. We had moved into our house shortly after I was born, and the woman who had lived there previously swore that the house was haunted. I never really put pieces together until I got older, I guess, but the woman had apparently claimed to hear children playing and laughing in the basement, but nobody was ever there. My family, being skeptical, didn't think too much of those claims, but a couple of strange occurrences would say otherwise. So when I was about 3, I would sit in the kitchen eating my meals, and in my line of sight was the hallway. My mum claims that I would always stop what I was doing, stare into the hallway and just point and repeatedly say "horsey," and then go back to eating my food like nothing had happened. She always got chills when I did that, apparently. A story from that house that my parents like to tell is about a remote control car that they bought me as a gift. Every night when I was in bed, they would put my toys away, which included putting the remote control car next to the fireplace in the living room. They would sit down to watch TV, and out of nowhere, the car would take off on its own. They always nervously put it back in its place. This became a regular occurrence, and at one point, they got fed up with it, took the batteries out of the car and the remote. They put the car back in its place and sat down to watch TV again. And yet again, that car took off on its own. They ended up returning the car to the shop that they had gotten it from, claiming that it was faulty. Since I was so young, I don't remember these 2 previous stories, but There is one thing that I do clearly remember from that house. As a kid, I would often be playing on my own as I was an only child. On a few of these occasions, clear as day, I would hear a woman's voice from right behind me. She never scared me, but she always stopped me in my tracks, and I would sit there for a moment contemplating if I had actually heard someone speaking to me. The strange thing is that she would always repeat the same thing in the same tone, but it wasn't English, and I could never replicate what she was saying. To this day, I still vaguely remember what she sounded like. This wouldn't only happen at the old house, though. I remember it happening at my grandmother's place on one occasion as well, but it was always the same voice. We moved when I was 5, and I remember it happening once after that. And to this day, I've never ever heard that voice again.